We're serious about your goals, and the RP Diet app is here to help. It creates a diet for your specific needs, lets you choose your favorite foods, and tells you exactly how much of them to eat and when. Expert System AI guides you along to keep you on track to your goals. For less than $15 a month, you have one of the most powerful diet coaches in your pocket. Cutting-edge data science tailored to your exact goals. The future is here today.
Folks, welcome back to the weekly webinar. Dr. Mike and Dr. James here. Got a little off schedule this week, but we still got our webinar in. Real quick, before we get started, I know you guys are anxious to get going on these questions. Today, we're going to do a short one today where we're going to answer about half of the questions from the big list that we got. And then we're going to do another webinar this week to get the remainder of the questions. We're just a little bit short on time. Mike was traveling and doing some RP stuff, and he's just got a lot of places to be at the moment. So what we're going to do today is get through about half of them, and then we're going to try and record another one tomorrow, and that'll be part 2 of the weekly webinar for this week. And so hopefully we'll get all those questions answered and a couple YouTube bonus ones, and we'll be good to go.
James, are you wearing a backpack?
No. So it's a weighted vest. I have been using the weighted vest for a while now, and I got re-inspired by James Krieger, who posted his weight vest review. So I had been using them for cardio stuff for a while now, and the one I have, I don't want to get it because it looks like a bomb. It looks like I'm wearing a fucking like terrorist bomb. You know what I mean? It's huge, and so like when I walk around the neighborhood, like there's a school, like a middle school, right in the neighborhood.
Oh my
God! I
God,
get the dirtiest looks from parents. So I've been using it for a while, and I really like it. And then I read James' thing, and I was like, God damn, there's something a little more merit to this. So I got a less oppressive. This one just looks like a backpack, kind of. It's pretty
cool. Okay.
Low profile, and it's only about 10 pounds. So I'm just going to give it a go and see how I'm going to try and wear it throughout the day instead of just cardio only, and just kind of see how I feel about it, because I found his stuff to be pretty compelling, and I've had good use with the vests in the past, so I'm going for it.
Very cool.
We'll see. I'll give updates maybe week to week and how I'm feeling.
Super.
Okay, so folks, normally I try to do a good job of sharing between the questions and when Mike and I are talking, but today I'm just going to leave it up on the questions because Mike's using this iPad, so he's just going to read it right from the screen share. So just keep that in mind. Normally I'd go back and forth, but today we're just doing the question screen.
All right, let's get into it.
Let's do it.
Martin Kumaru says, "Hey docs, thank you for the great answers last time. First of all, I wanted to say the James beard suits him well. Definitely."
Oh, flattered. Thank you.
All right. Anyway, to the questions. Due to a multitude of incompatible choices during my last metabolite phase, high rep squats with reduced breathing functionality, trimmed the last 4 reps of any set into breathing squats, which felt horrible. Supersetting different dumbbell chest variations. Before finding out that my forearms cannot handle a lot of fatigue, so every exercise became a forearm exercise, biceps limiting me on back supersets, etc., led me to not using supersets unless I was running out of time. However, I have recently been experimenting with them to see which work for me. This made me wonder. I've put them into my last meso for the exercises I have, meso 3 and 4, to introduce some variation. Do you generally recommend using supersets in this way, supersetting every exercise if it goes well for the entire meso, or do you often only superset a few exercises? I was wondering if you could talk a bit in general about how you use them in your training. I mean, so supersets really just zonk you out. So a lot of times you'll use them as the second to last or last exercise. And also because supersets cannot be done with everything, and there's some limits, and they're only really metabolite technique, I would only use them for a meso or 2, and also I would only use them for 1 or maybe 2. I really don't ever do more than 1 supersetted exercise per session, per muscle group, and I don't do every session with supersets. So maybe like if I do 6 sessions a week, 4 of them or 3 of them will have supersets, and it'll only be 1 superset, and it'll be towards the end of training that muscle group for that session. James?
Yeah, so I mean, I basically never program supersets unless there's a time constraint or there's like metabolite stuff that we're working on. And in that case, it's an agonist superset. If you're asking about like antagonists or like non-related supersets, I almost never program that just because it comes at such a great cost to whatever you're doing. And like, I agree with what Mike said. If I do use it with somebody, it's usually 1 or 2 exercises towards the end of the session that are more accessory type movements, not necessarily like prime exercises for that day. I mean, you think about it like, what are you gaining outside of just less time by supersetting like bench and like pull-ups together. You're just going to make each one of those shittier as you go. So there's not a huge incentive outside of just doing it for the sake of time. And at that point, you're making a very calculated trade-off, which is fine, but it's a trade-off.
Yep. Number 2, since supersetting my exercises introduce some variation, do you have any recommendations on what to do with exercises where I can't, like back exercises, high rep, or supersetting just work my biceps? I still want to introduce some more variation, but I can't use supersets. This would be with some machines where I can't change the handles. Well, so for back, you actually can superset. What you can do is superset dumbbell or machine pullovers, or even cable pullovers, to pull downs or rows of various sorts. So I would give that a try. But look, if you can't do supersets and it's just not working, don't do supersets. They're not magical. You can do Myo reps or you can do regular sets. There ain't nothing wrong with a regular work set. So just remember that. Straight sets are very good.
I remember some of the old classic Rolly Winklar training videos. He would actually do like trisets for the big compound movements. He'd do like trisets of like rows, pull downs, and like, hammer strength, schmagma, whatever movement. But I always wondered, I was like, man, that's got to be just, why not just do all those
really
things
big.
one at a time?
Right. And get some proper rest between them for sure.
Yeah.
Number 3, is it common to have quote unquote helper muscles that fatigue very easily? I've had some times after back workout where my forearms are so fatigued that I literally cannot curl afterwards. They hurt and cramp. Luckily, using straps have helped with this. Very good. But it just seems crazy that 16 sets of backs can grip my forearms. It's like that for almost everyone. I don't do a ton of deadlifts and other grip intensive exercises, so it's mostly back exercises that cause my forearm fatigue. I would directly train forearms with various forearm curls. That will really help. But yes, dude, the thing is like not almost every single pro bodybuilder uses, not even straps, these Versa grips, which are even better than straps. So get some Versa grips. It's a thing. Your back is never going to be, it's so funny. I had a question like that on Instagram and some guy answered it, which I really encourage people to answer questions on Instagram that are asked of me, but I love it when other people answer them because when they get it right, I just either like it or I say like, boom, or he's got it. But one guy was like, shit, it doesn't make sense that your forearm should ever limit your back. Like their muscles, shouldn't they just get strong just like your back and be paired with it? Well, like your back just gets stronger than your forearms. Your forearms are tiny. Your back is enormous. Like it's like saying like, if I do a squat to press, shouldn't I be able to press as much as I front squat? No, nobody can front squat. That's insane. Like, so it's Martin, it's totally a normal thing and it's okay to use straps.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said, like if your forearms are so unconditioned that you can't do like some like upright rows and curls just at like when you're fresh. But after a back workout, that's very common. I really wouldn't sweat it too much. I think if you try to like do a set of curls and your forearms are preventing you from doing curls when you're relatively fresh, then I would say, yeah, you just need to like just keep at it for a little while, get your forearms conditioned to a point where you can do some basic stuff. And then after that, you can move on to straps and blah, blah, blah. But it doesn't seem to be the case here.
Yeah. Okay. So Martin says, number 4, how do you determine meso length? I've always done 4 to 5 weeks starting at MEV and going over MRV. That made me think I could make a 6-month-long meso if I just had every muscle group in MEV.
Six month long meso.
And kept them there, and I could make a 1-week meso by doing 30 sets for each muscle group. I know you should obviously increase sets each week, but how do you determine how much? It was easy for me before, since sets always had to increase steadily from MEV to MRV over 4 or 5 weeks. So the numbers, whether it was going 8 to 12 or 12 to 24, had to fit within those 4 to 5 weeks. I actually wouldn't do it like that, Martin. But now that I want to find out my own optimal meso length, I'm kind of lost on what to do. So what you do is use the RP set progression algorithm, which is actually on our website now. It's in the hypertrophy guide. In the hypertrophy guide central hub, the set progression algorithm basically says, if you're healing on time and your performance is good, add, and it shows you how many sets to add as examples. It's like 1 to 2 or 2 to 3, or add 0 sets. You just follow that and it basically auto-regulates. So essentially it's one of those things where it's like, are you getting good pumps? And are you improving your rep strength? And are you getting too sore? And if you checkbox whatever those boxes and shows you how to do it, it basically wants you to keep getting great pumps and get great workouts and make sure you're healing on time and not losing strength. And if that's the case, you add sets, right? But if you're just staying in MEV, you just programmatically wouldn't add sets on purpose, but that doesn't really optimize hypertrophy. And that's a bit of a downside. Or if you bum rush, you actually do 30 sets for each muscle group once a week, then you actually expose yourself to much higher injury risk and you get very low quality amount of time. Your accumulation to deload ratio ends up being like 1-to-1, which is awful. The 6-month-long meso, the accumulation to deload ratio is awesome, but the quality of the accumulation is dog shit. For most people, something like 4 to 8 weeks is where the best ratio occurs, or a good ratio. But remember, we also talked about in the last webinar that the difference between a 4-to-1 and a 5-to-1 and a 6-to-1 accumulation to deload ratio might completely go out in the wash, because when you train hard and get to a new level by training a little bit harder with a lower accumulation phase length, the supercompensation probably makes up for anything. And remember, you don't lose anything on the deload, except you drop fatigue and you become sensitized again to training. So a shorter accumulation to deload ratio actually does those things better. So on average, 48 weeks is totally fine. But what I would do is do the set progression algorithm and auto-regulate from there. You're essentially trying to get as long, like let's say you got great pumps from 3 sets in week 1. You can do 3 sets again and get okay pumps, but you can get 4 sets and get great pumps again, and then 5 and get great pumps again and again and again. And then when you hit your MRV, you deload, and you'll find out that that's roughly going to be 48 weeks, depending on which muscle groups you're training.
Yeah, so I agree with Mike on that. And just to be like really clear on something that I think got overlooked on the question. So he says, I could make a 6-month-long meso if I just had every muscle group at MEV and kept them there. What we're forgetting is that MEV moves up over time when you are repeating the same stimuli, right? So if you said, okay, my MEV, let's just make a very blanket statement, so around 3 sets per movement, right? Obviously it's going to be different, but that 3 sets might get you the first 1, 2, maybe 2, maybe even 3 weeks of some type of good, robust
notable
training
gains. Yep.
But at some point, that starts to get into that gray area of between MEV and MV, and eventually it just becomes MV. So you're just doing MV training at that point, right? Because the volume landmarks do tend to shift around while you train. So it's a good thought, like your thought process is good, but we forgot that those things move around a little bit. So eventually you would be at MEV in between MEV and MV, and then you would eventually move your way into MV. That's why it's important to keep going up over time.
Yep. And your point fundamentally stands like you can stay at MEV even if you upregulate it, but just barely. You could say that maybe not 6 months, but let's say 12 weeks. Right, but then is that the best training? Well, it's actually the minimally effective training you could have done.
Right.
And it's better to go and cycle, get a little bit harder, a little bit harder. You want to basically stay as close to MAV as you can, and the set progression algorithm will get you there.
And then, sorry, one last point and we'll move on. But one of the problems that you run into with just pursuing MEV by itself is that eventually it creeps up to the point where MEV is roughly at MRV, right? And so now your minimum gains are at basically the top end of what you can tolerate, and you're going to have to do a pretty substantial amount of resensitization to get it back into a kind of a normal training zone at that point, which might be more than the normal deload. It might be more of like an active rest type situation.
Yeah, great point.
Thank you. Sorry, did I skip?
All right. Nope.
Oh, no. Oh, so yeah, Ansh.
As always, Anshuman Radhakrishnan, villain, hero, who knows? Maybe both, maybe neither. Hey docs, hope you're both doing well. So just started a long fat loss diet, 3 4-to-1 mesos aside, but would refer to this as a 12 or 15 week diet. I don't know, man. He says, I don't diet during deload week, so I refer to it as a 12-week one, but I feel like a lot of people would call it a 15-week one since I'm not really taking a diet break during deload either. So I would say it's a 14-week diet because the last microcycle is you're really just off the diet. It's 14 weeks would be the most technically correct, but either way you refer to it. I think 15 is the next best thing. 12 is more technical.
I always just go with like the total length of the intended diet.
The whole thing, yeah.
But,
and since most people don't include the last deload as a total length, I would say it's 14 weeks.
Right, exactly.
Planning to lose 10%. Oh, so you say blah, 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 by break during deload. Okay. Planning to lose 10% of body weight. That's impressive. So 0.3 weight loss per week. Okay. Sounds just fine. So I'm in the second week right now, which means that by the time you guys get around to answering this, will be my third week. Okay. My question mainly is about figuring out when to make calorie adjustments when you suspect that water is maxing fat loss. During previous cuts and mini cuts, I've pretty reliably noticed that I retain a lot of water. This diet seems like no exception so far. In the first week or so, I'll lose the expected few pounds from glycogen and food bloat loss, but as early as the second or third week, it'll look like my weight has plateaued, even though I'll set up what should be a sizable and appropriate deficit for my goals. In the past, I usually wait this out for a week or two and then make the expected calorie cut. I'll lose a few pounds overnight and then end up either on track for my goal or even ahead of schedule. This leads me to suspect that I may have been premature in cutting those calories, and if I just waited things out, I may have seen weight loss as expected without having to eat less food. What do you guys think? I think during this particular diet, there's definitely a possibility that I'm not as big of a deficit as I should be since I'm not super hungry, or that could just mean because I'm pushing my body weight up pretty high in the preceding mass. Yes, it can. On the other hand, I'm seeing other subjective indicators that fat loss is happening, but could have been leaner. My gym performance isn't as good as it is on mass or on maintenance. I think I'm mostly inclined to wait things out as far as adjustments until the end of the meso. If I do end up being truly behind schedule for that, I'll have 2/3 of the diet left to pick up the pace. Thanks as always. Yeah, I've been learning that more and more that as you learn your body, you can delay the cutting adjustments pretty well. I would say, based on reading it, I would give it 2 weeks and then cut And you can always, 2 weeks is not a big deal. You can always catch up. James?
Yeah, I'm just kind of curious. Like, I know Ansh is he's a very smart guy, but I think he's fair to say relative kind of new to training or in the kind of beginners.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So
End of the beginners.
End of the beginner, maybe transitioning towards intermediate. I would say I'm just wondering what is the necessity of like really trying to get to like that level of leanness where you're having to make those type of calculations. You might not need to yet outside of just doing it for fun and for vanity. And if that's the reason, that's totally great. I would also say like at this stage in your training age, it might not be worth pursuing that level of leanness where you're really starting to see like that level of masking in the numbers for intermediate and advanced athletes, especially for people who are doing physique contests like your Steve Halls, your Jan Frieses out there. That is a necessary challenge that you have to overcome. I would only put it out there, just like you might not need to fuss over that. You might just go in the gym, have good training, keep your diet on point for the most part, not worry about that, and just do your best.
Yeah.
I mean, I appreciate the intellectual pursuit of that, but at the same time, I kind of if it was my client, I'd be like, dude, what are you doing? Don't worry about that. Just keep going.
Yeah, Ansh is a computer guy. You know, he's got to be numbers oriented. So
yeah, no, I appreciate that. I'm also like,
for sure.
What would James do?
Yeah. Drink a lot.
Yeah, well.
All right.
Trying to cut back a little bit.
Charles Vickers says, thanks to you two and Dr. Davis for answering my question last week. It was very helpful. Another question came to me while I was watching the webinar. Where did James and Mel get that pimp knife block in the background? That thing is awesome. You
guys see, awesome. Let's see if I can use my hand to, I can't. There we go. Oh, there we go. It's like a Spartan guy, and the knives are going into his shield. I got it on Amazon. There's a couple different ones, but I just found it on Amazon. And the guy who makes those like puts these little kooky notes in the box. You can tell he's just like an old hippie who has way too much time on his hand and just gets high and does woodworking.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I really liked it. That's how I see Toombs becoming one day, right? Like once
Excellent.
He retires, he's just like, I'm gonna just keep doing shop stuff and sell my cool stuff on Etsy, which we bought his coasters. They were really great.
Pete Dawson.
Oops, sorry.
Yo, gents, excited to get some insight. Number one, brachialis specialization. In my case, and pretty often I find my arms look smallest from the front when my thumbs are pointing forward. A bigger brachialis would help thicken/widen this view, and brachialis development looks sick from the side. Any tips or exercise that favor targeting the brachialis? Zero, none. Never looked into it. Have no idea. James? Sorry, Pete.
No, here's the thing, Pete, is even if we did like take a little bit of time to figure out like which movements might hit that area a little bit better, what's very likely going to happen is the trade-off in terms of like total muscle mass that you're hitting from using like a selective exercise versus just doing something like a barbell curl is probably like a net slower progress in the long term to developing bicep thickness. That would be my opinion. Mike, I'd love to hear what you think on that. So like if you're trying to do like spider curls or something, right? Like, yeah, you're definitely hitting that region, but like you're hitting such a small percentage of that total bicep mass relative to like doing something like even just like an alternating dumbbell curl or a barbell curl, easy curl. You might just be better off hitting like a bigger, more a bigger magnitude stimulus type exercise.
Yeah, I totally agree. But Pete, there's people out there, there's folks out there that could probably help you with some biomechanics reasoning. I just don't think it's James and I.
Sorry, I said spider curls. I meant the one where you go across your body. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
I forgot what that's called.
I know what those are.
Oh, sorry,
all right.
I have to scroll.
Number 2. Yeah, sorry. Maintenance volume for a specific portion of a muscle. Say I build my upper pecs with lots of incline work and then I get shoulder issues that only allow me to flat press. Will all my flat pressing be enough to maintain upper pecs I built? Almost certainly. Almost certainly. Generally, training a muscle to a full range of motion maintains for almost certainly the entire thing. Another example.
Sorry, the flat movements hit like a huge swath of the chest as it is.
Yes.
It's not like it only hits the middle. It hits all of it. It's like a huge portion.
Another example, I built thick erectors seemingly from deadlifts. Would barbell rows and non-supported T-bar rows be enough to maintain that? So I haven't done deadlifts in years because of injury concerns. And I built my erectors doing deadlifts, and I done bent over rows since then, T-bar rows, etc. And I've actually gotten even bigger erectors. So absolutely, yes.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I think that, if you're somebody who's pulling like 800 for 5, maybe not. But if you're kind of like a normal person, then I think that's probably fine.
Number 3, jaw hypertrophy. What would you do if your client was an actor/model who wanted to hypertrophy their jaw/masseter for more unique facial shape?
There was a thing going around like maybe 5 or 6
Yeah.
months ago, the
Yeah.
thing that you put in your mouth and you chew it
Yeah.
for this exact purpose.
Yeah, like if you want to look ridiculous, sure. I would just put them on a whole lot of Anadrol. That usually does.
That's what I was gonna say. Get him on the cocktail. Get that Jay Cutler cocktail going. I don't know
The
what
Jay Cutler, yeah,
his jaw
lots of
grew
insulin,
so
lots of
goddamn much.
growth. Yeah, so that's a good start. But other than I've never really given it any thought. I don't know, man. I've never literally. I could tell you, like, yes, hypothetically, you could do some full range of motion weighted chewing, but gee whiz, that's tough.
Taffy apples.
Yeah.
Have you ever eaten one of them shits and not had your face like
exactly? You like get pissed. You're like, this is delicious. I want to eat more of it, but I can't. I can't.
I hurt. Yeah, that would be my recommendation. That's a good way to mask too. Lots of taffy apples.
Number 4, stimulant cycling. Totally hypothetical, kind of random, but is there a merit to cycling stimulants to keep from going to tolerance? Say like 2 weeks of caffeine, 2 weeks of ephedrine, 2 weeks of Clen, 2 weeks of cocaine, JK, LOL, repeat thoughts. Yeah, there is. A lot of times you want to keep the same substances in for longer and not switch substances a lot, but generally speaking, you can ramp and decrease substances. We have a good example in the RP Diet book about how to cycle caffeine intake. And I've written a lot about that. I've done a lot of videos about that. So there's a lot to do there. Like, you start with sort of like some green tea, and then you get into black coffee, and then you get into monsters, and then you get into pre-workout, and then you deload after that. So, yeah.
So I think it's kind of a funny question because I think there's a lot to say about cycling dosage of something that you're already using. I'm not entirely sure about cycling the actual item. Mike, are you still there? You went
still
away.
There.
Okay.
Sorry.
Oh, there. No, you can go away if you want. I just wanted to make sure I didn't lose you. Yeah, I don't know if there's any merit to actually switching off of which. Outside of health reasons, like maybe you don't want to be using Clen or cocaine for extended periods of time. But I'm not really sure on that one. Do you have any thoughts on that, Mike?
Yeah, no, so Clen definitely has like a very fast adaptation window, so you want to do some of that, and there's the ephedrine stuff. It's a thing, but I would look to Team Evil GSP. Broderick Chavez can help you out with stuff like that. Much more in the know.
I wish we could use ephedra again. That was great.
Apparently, you're a big fan.
Mm-hmm.
MRV for Kegels.
Bitch is a hoe.
You know what I'm saying?
Were you trying to get MRV with the Kegel exercise?
Yeah. Just I guess don't over bang.
I have no idea. You know what? And we were just making like slut shaming jokes, but we didn't really mean it. But there are people who do that type of exercise for like pelvic floor rehabilitation. I think after like having children and stuff like that. So it's definitely a thing you could consider. I know it's like more of a cheeky question, but I don't know. It's definitely
it exists.
It exists. Yeah, for sure.
All right. Connor Gone. Hello, Mike and James. I followed your advice for my mini sessions, and I've been able to get more volume for side for adults biceps than ever. And it seems to be working. So thanks for that. Some questions this week are
awesome.
Yeah, it's really good. Number 1, do you find any value in the 10 to 20 rep behind the neck press for delts? I've done them in the past, superset with laterals, and I always get a really good pump from them because the exercise has got a really bad rep. Oh, but the exercise has got a really bad rep. Just looking for some variation other than laterals and upright rows for my side delts in my quest to get Cell Saga TN level delts. Yeah, Jesus Christ. So
TN was so jacked.
He was super jacked. And that third eye certainly didn't hurt the process. Man, I tell you what. I think that if they're fine for your joints, do them up. If the stimulus to fatigue ratio makes sense, you're getting good pumps, good mind-muscle connection, good disruption to the muscle, and you're not getting any fatigue issues, joint wear and tear, so on and so forth, then they're golden. Right? If you feel them in the right muscles, especially. I can't do them because they beat the fuck out of my shoulder joints in a bad way, but if you like them, you like them.
Yeah, I think that particular exercise, the 10 to 20 rep range, is kind of the key factor because the 5 to 10, it's so unstable and so much wear and tear. It's just a really, really bad trade-off in terms of SFR. I think done at 10 to 20, it's light enough where you can control it very well. You can maintain the range of motion, and you can always bail if something goes wrong very easily. So I think it's okay. I think Mike and I collectively have just gotten away from overhead pressing programming for people who want to do more physique related stuff, just because it generally seems to be a bad trade-off of either systemic fatigue or just like shoulder wear and tear or a combination of both. So I think we've gotten away from that, but I think it's fine. If the numbers fit, go for it.
Yeah. Number 2, I'm currently massing for 2 more months until my baby comes at the end of March. Like to quote 50 Cent, I forgot what the line is, but he was basically going to write a check for $1 million to a girl claiming to have his baby because he's so rich he doesn't even care. I'll write the check before the baby come. Who the fuck cares? I'm stanky rich. I'ma die trying to spend this shit. South side up in this bitch. And
You know
he's so
quite a bit of
suicidal.
that.
Yeah, it's just like it's something you can't get rid of. I would love to trade that knowledge for actual knowledge. Then I plan on doing, and then he later declared bankruptcy. Guess he's not that stanky rich. Then I plan on doing maintenance phase since I probably won't be able to properly overload because of stress and lack of sleep. My question is, at what point should I add maintenance? I plan to do some proper cutting phase after. I was thinking whenever my sleep schedule gets somewhat under control, is there any other input I should consider? I think sleep under control is great. And also, do you have the time to train as much as you would like for a cutting phase? And if those two things are checked, you can get your meals in, you get your sleep, and get some time to train, then you're good to go.
Yeah, I'm gonna just put this out there since some of our friends have had babies in the fairly recently. I don't think that you're going to have the resources to run a proper cut or mass phase within like the first year or two after that baby comes out. Let's be real. Like you might, and if you are in a position in life where you can have family helping out, or you have nannies or daycare services or something, then you might, and that'd be awesome. But from what I've seen with a lot of my friends and family, that first year or two is just a shit show. So I would say it's probably going to be maintenance diet, maintenance training for a while. I would say plan for that. And if you find yourself in a position where you can, even better. Awesome. Great. But plan for maintenance.
Yeah. Number 3, is there such a thing as a really adaptive metabolism? I noticed my first mini cut that I had great fat loss in the first 2 weeks and then it stalled pretty hard. I was eating around 17 to 1800 calories when my normal maintenance is 2400, 2500. I've never ran into this issue when cutting at a slower pace. If so, is there anything you can do to accommodate this? I don't think that's your metabolism. I think it's probably water weight stuff, which tends to happen when you cut really, really quickly. That would be my first guess. So I would just keep cutting at a mini cut pace and not really have to cut down super deep. And when you finish cutting and start massing again, the water weight fluctuation is going to be big. And you're like, oh, wow, I didn't actually, I lost a lot more weight than I thought I was going to.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, Harrison Caton. Hello, doctors Mike and James. I'm a recent subscriber to RP Plus, and I've really been enjoying the webinar so far. For the content on RP Plus, where's a good place to start? My interest is in powerlifting, weightlifting, and less so in bodybuilding. Oh, man, you just got to search through those videos. There's like a zillion of them. Good luck.
Yeah. I honestly, I don't even know where to start. I guess it depends on there are some courses that are geared for people who need more basics. Like if you don't really have any exercise science background, or maybe don't have a lot of biology or chemistry, there are a couple easy ones to start with where it's under the beginner courses. But after that, just sift around until you find what you like.
Yep. This next question is more for Dr. James. I've been reading Integrated Periodization. Integrated Periodization of Strength Training and Athletic Development, IPISTAD and AD. IPIST and AD. IPISTAD. You will never become nothing. And I have realized that I skipped a stage of anatomical adaptation, page 134, that is training 30 to 40% of 1RM and building up to 60 to 70% of 1RM over 2 to 3 years for the specific purpose of building tendon and ligament strength. When I started training...
Sorry, real quick. So the Tutor Bump is really big on this. And I don't want to say that we don't see eye to eye, because we do, but just the phrasing is something that we didn't totally agree on. So his anatomical adaptation is basically like a 2-phase thing, which is like developing the basic work capacity for like functional training. And then part 2 is like what we would call hypertrophy or work capacity training. So it's kind of both of those things, just so everyone's clear what that means.
And that's for people pretty young in the sport, right? Or even children?
Or just people going from like 0 to sport training, right? Even if you're an adult, it's basically like you just need to develop a tolerance to loading. First of all, that's what that 30 to 40% of 1RM phase is. Mm-hmm. And then the 60 to 70 is more like what we would see in normal bodybuilding or work capacity.
Right. When I started weight training at age 13, I had no coach. I was also homeschooled and had no formal instruction from a PE teacher. I promise you missed nothing, by the way. Know what the fuck I ever learned in PE. And my family is all untrained. I knew nothing else than max out for reps every session from age 13. I mean, everyone did that from age 13 to 15.
Yeah.
My self-written programs was do a set of 12 and 60%, 8RM. 8RM is correct. I mean, 8 rep max. a set of 10 at 80% ARM, and then a rep max going for 8. It's a pretty intelligent program, actually.
Yeah,
a rep max guy just went to Phelan and everything. A rep max going for 8, which if I got, I would move up in weight the following week. Lastly, I'd repeat my first set of 12 at 60% at 8 RM. I do this for all exercises 3 days a week. Now I'm 22. At 16, I found powerlifting and have over time improved my training thanks mostly to RP and JTS content. Between the scientific principle of strength training and writing my own program off of that and the Juggernaut AI program, I made significant progress and put 287 pounds of my total in the past 2 years.
Holy shnikes.
However, I regularly have small knee ligament and tendon injuries or tweaks 2 to 3 a year that cause me to have to back off of hard training and severely get in my head when squatting and sometimes pulling. After USAP All-Around Nationals in October this year, I would like to dedicate 2 to 3 month period of time to anatomical adaptation before my next quad 4-year cycle. What are your recommendations for lower body exercises 2 to 3 months? Long enough or too long? I would have to go all the way down to 30% of 1RM? No. Is this even realistic for someone my age? Again, I'm 22.
So that initial start of the anatomical adaptation stage is something that you can largely glaze over because you are already well trained at this point, and by training age you might even be intermediate, right? So that 30 to 40% is more towards people who are coming back from extended periods off, like if you took like a month off because you were on holiday, something like that, or you're relatively new to training. You are not, so you can largely skip that. The knee stuff is kind of interesting, but that kind of comes with the territory in powerlifting. Like it's one of those, like if you say I'm a powerlifter and I have some knee pain like 2 or 3 times a year, everyone's going to look at you like, and yes, do you have something else to say? Right. So that's not to say that you're supposed to be in pain all the time, but it's like getting bruised in rugby. Like you're going to get bruises from time to time. Why? Because somebody tackled you. So I think you can kind of skip that phase. And really what's going to be really important for you is finding that golden zone of hypertrophy training for powerlifting, where you're finding movements that are really good high SFR. You can use a lot of weight, but not so much weight that you're always crippling your joints all the time. I think that's probably going to be more important for you. The problem with powerlifting is that you really can't be going below loading zones of 10 reps. I mean, what I mean by that is, you shouldn't be using weights that are so light that you can do more than 10 reps consistently. That's going to be generally the cutoff point in terms of the force velocity trade-offs that are acceptable within the specificity of powerlifting. So at that point, you might just have to be playing with some of your exercise variants and finding ones that just aren't so brutal on the joints. And Mike has coined the term SFR, which also includes this issue of like joint pain. And so that would be my first recommendation on that, is you're going to still be doing, sets of 8 to 10 for hypertrophy, but you're going to be trying to find ones that get a really good stimulus on the quads and on the hips that don't blow up your knees quite as much.
Yep. For both of you in IPIST and AD, they say on page 136 under injury prevention for high school athlete, don't participate in competitions in weightlifting, powerlifting, use heavy loads such as over 80% of 1RM. Before athletes achieve skeletal maturation, often after the age of 18 to 20 years. Is this accurate? How does youth or sub-junior powerlifting and weightlifting fit in with this?
I don't totally agree with that point. I think the notion was like, the spirit of that notion is like, don't have your young, relatively undeveloped athletes maxing out all the time. And competition is like the opportunity for you to really max out. The idea being there, and I think Mike will mostly agree with this, is like our young athletes can do strength training, but they should be spending quite a bit of time doing hypertrophy training, building up the muscle mass that's going to make you successful in the sport of powerlifting. And then eventually you're going to find yourself trying to figure out which weight class you should fall into based on how strong and how muscular and how fat you are, all of those things. The spirit of that recommendation is, there's no real incentive for having like your middle school athletes doing sets of 1, and that includes competition. It's just too much risk, not enough reward, where they could be doing sets of 5 to 10, even just like on the lower end, like 5, getting huge strength gains, getting huge muscle mass gains, and risking very, very little.
Agreed. Absolutely agreed. For sleep on weekdays, I get 7.5 hours a night. However, on the weekend, I currently try to sleep 10 plus hours. Is it better to sleep 8 hours every day of the week and be consistent, or get the extra on the weekend? I think the consistency trumps the pulsatility, James.
Totally agree.
Lastly, is a suggestion for the RP Diet app. We're not taking suggestions. I'm just kidding. I've been using since January of 19. was a long time ago. Can you add badges, which you can earn for, say, 10 meals roughly of macros in a row, or for every pound you lose, get a badge? I'm kind of thinking it would work like the badges in Halo. Sweet.
Mhm.
Some are for big things, but also some for simple things. But I think this would keep motivation high and allow something for somebody to get to set intent toward. We absolutely have a bunch of stuff like that, and it works. Yeah, really, really great idea. So
It's hard because Mike and I typically don't get into that kind of stuff. And so we would, I think, like, at least for me, my first inclination would be like, nah. But then, like, a lot of people do find that to be really useful. So we have to outsource, some help from other people who would be like, no, we need to do this. You need to incorporate
right.
this. It's worth it.
Yep. All right. Hi, Doctors Mike and James. Oh, sorry. Same person still. I'm looking forward to college for a master's degree and potentially a PhD in something sports related. A long-term goal would be a very skilled personal trainer and to teach the type of stuff you guys all teach, be it in a college setting or something, some other modality. I also would want to have focus towards youth ages 13 to 18. My parole officer says I'm not allowed to be around children, but hopefully the appeal. Oh, wait, sorry, that's just me. My love is powerlifting and weightlifting. Graduated at 16 from high school. God damn.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah, homeschool is the shit.
Does he mean graduated, or does he mean left
finished
high
homeschool? Oh, he left. He did not get a GED. I was done with that shit. Graduated with my bachelor's of science in IT when I was 19. Fuck. And I'm about to finish my final year at Bible college, where I've studied children's and youth ministry. God damn, son, how many degrees are you trying to get?
All over the place. Really
I'm planning on taking a year off and then going back to school in the fall of 2021. At the time I start college, I had no idea where that training and coaching would be such a passion of mine. I'm willing to move anywhere in the U.S. Where are the best places to go right now? I was looking at ETSU, seeing as that's where both of you went for a PhD, specifically the sports science and coaching education master's degree. Also, is there a good resource for explaining what sports-related degrees are out there and what they cover? Like, what's the difference between sports science, exercise science, and kinesiology, for example? Yeah, there's some good resource for that. ETSU, I don't know. I can't say much there without violating some politically incorrect opinions. It's probably a good program. I don't know if there's maybe some changes working there. I have no idea. What I would say is look up researchers that publish the kind of papers you want to be involved in, the kind of science you think is awesome. Find out where they are. Pick 25 or 30 of your favorite researchers that have published papers at institutions. Find if those institutions have a master's program, and if those people that published it or were on the papers at all are taking students, if their labs are taking students. You get maybe 10 or 15 schools. Then look through the schools and apply to all of them. And once you get into a bunch of the schools, visit them, talk to the professors, think about which one's the best option, and go from there.
Yeah, and so I think that's a really good recommendation. My take on this right now is there's 2 schools in Florida, and I honestly don't remember which 2. I think one is like maybe University of Florida, maybe one's University of Miami or Florida at Miami. There's 2 really good exercise science programs out that way right now that I can at least off the top of my head say like those are pretty solid. I think Ryan went to one of them, one of our colleagues, Dr. Alexander, I should say. Those are 2 really good options. I think there's not really a lot of sport-related degrees. What you're going to find is mostly kinesiology as the blanket term to incorporate a lot of things. And then what you'll see a lot in a more specific sense is like exercise science, right? You'll see plenty of master's programs in exercise science. And within exercise science, there's all sorts of things like exercise physiology, biomechanics, motor learning, all sorts of crazy stuff. There are very few like truly sport-related degree programs because in sports science, we make a very distinct divergence from exercise science, where exercise science looks at all forms of exercise and looks at kind of different outcomes in the physiological sense and the performance sense. In sport science, we're really only interested in what are things that contribute towards success or preventing failure in sport. That's it. We don't really care as much about like health promotion or the merit of using this exercise versus that exercise. Our focus is like, okay, we have an athlete. We want to make them from the collegiate level, take them into the professional level to the world championship level. That's all we care about. So it seems like it would be really popular, but it ends up being a very niche field. Whereas like exercise science, there's tons of degree programs out there, most of which are excellent. And there's different little niches within exercise science, which you can pursue like physiology, biomechanics, et cetera. So lots of options there. I would look mostly in the realm of exercise science to get yourself warmed up and then branch out from there once you kind of know more about what you want to do.
Boom. Jason Koshi says, thanks for the tips on jumping last week. Context, goal is to dunk once and then move on to my life.
Oh, we called it. All right. Yes. That's what I was wondering.
That's awesome. All right, question number 1. I'll be finishing up weight loss / hypertrophy within 4 to 5 weeks. When I transition to a strength block, would 1 macrocycle be sufficient? Working with a 5 to 6 range, 4 to 5 weeks, that would be a mesocycle. Or is it necessary to add a second block at 3 to 4 reps? So second mesocycle. When I transition to a strength block, would 1 mesocycle be sufficient? Because it depends on for power.
She's going into a power block after that.
Yeah, my inclination is to spend 2 mesocycles in a strength block if you want to get real serious, James.
I agree. And I think what you're suggesting, like, I would maybe expand those out a little bit. So he's saying 1 macrocycle be sufficient within the 5 to 6. Make that like 4 to 8, and then make the latter one like 1 to 5. And then you're good to go at that point.
Yeah. All right. Then after strength, we'll shift to a strength power block. Okay, that's a mesocycle, not block. Well, I guess could be a block if it's more than 1 mesocycle.
Could go either way, yeah.
In this block, I'll do some sort of speed squat or hex bar jump. Okay, it sounds fine.
Hex bar jump is actually an interesting one. I don't know if you saw some of Dr. Sukamel's stuff on that, but it's actually they've used that as and compared it to the mid-thigh pull position, and they found it's very comparable.
That's basically the same movement.
Mm-hmm.
Question 2, the focus would be on becoming more explosive. So for the weekly progression, would it make sense to go lift heavy percent to light percent or light percent to heavy percent? So for the weekly progression, what you want to do is increase. You probably want to have 2 types of days, and you may have several more. A high force session and a high velocity session.
Yes.
And you want to progress the load on the high force one, and the velocity one. Ideally, you would progress velocity, but you probably just want to go for peak velocity and increase the load a little bit every week just to keep the peak velocity roughly the same. James?
Yeah, and so the trouble that you run into, and I agree with Mike, the trouble that you run into with that model is that you have to emphasize the preparedness of your power and velocity sessions, whereas the normal tendency would be like, okay, I got heavy squats, let's do those Monday when I'm really fresh, right? Normally, that's a good idea. In this case, since the goal of the block is going to be that power or that explosiveness, you're going to move those training sessions to the days when you can have the most elevated preparedness. So that's probably going to be like your A session during the week is your power session. And the thing is, if you do a strength session before that, it can absolutely run interference on a subsequent power session. If you run a power session and then later, like on Wednesday, you have a strength session, it's very unlikely that that power session is going to interfere with that strength session. Strength will hold out a little bit longer in terms of fatigue. Power will not. So you want your power ones to be when you are the most fresh and most prepared, and the strength-based ones to be when you're slightly more fatigued. But again, the power sessions are not likely to wipe you out on the strength sessions, whereas the reverse is true.
Awesome. Question 3, for the strength power block, what range would you recommend? I'm thinking between 30 and 50%. For the strength component, I would go from 75 to 85% or 75 to 90% 1RM. And for the speed component, I would go, it depends on how you're calculating it. The total percent of 1RM for the load lifted is around 30% for peak power, but a lot of times that's body weight because you have to include your body mass into it. James, can you expand on it a little bit?
Yeah, it's also exercise dependent. So what we find is that peak power output's usually achieved anywhere between like 30 and 70% of your max force output. So it depends on the exercise. Usually for like jumping, it's actually going to, jumping and sprinting, typically you don't want to load a whole lot more than like 10% of your body weight, believe it or not, because that's where you tend to see the better transfer of training effects. What we see is once you start going kind of above 10 more consistently into like the 20s, 30%, you just get really good at weighted jumping, and it doesn't seem to translate as well into unweighted jumping. Whereas that closer margin that's near your body weight in terms of sprinting and jumping seems to have better transfer of training effects. And usually around 10% is where the mechanics and the movement speed are not altered so significantly that it's falling outside of the specificity of the goal. So and a classic one is when the resisted sprinting. If you give somebody a sled toe exercise and you put 20% of their body weight on there, their sprint mechanics change so significantly, it's detectable by math. In research, you can find this, and actually, so immediately you're doing a different movement, right? You're not training the same movement anymore. So that's the problem.
Yep.
So I would try to keep the load on the power emphasized ones relatively low. If you're doing something like a jump, if you're doing something like a power clean, you can obviously load it up a lot more, like 70, 80%, something like that. I think the relative scaling is more useful here. The 1RM and max effort scaling can be kind of confusing. So on your strength days, I would say like, you could use like 90% of your best 5 is a good way of kind of doing that or something, instead of trying to always use 1RM, because I don't know, I just find that it falls short. I like the relative scaling. So relative just means like scale to whatever it is that you're actually doing. If you're doing five reps, 5 sets of 5 reps or something like that, that's on that.
1RM is so far off, it loses predictive validity after a while, really.
Yeah, and it doesn't account for multiple
about this much, but exactly.
So I would do that, but don't load up. So the one thing, like, okay, I'll get off this. I know we got to move on, but one thing that drives me fucking bonkers is when you see people doing jump squats with like 225. Like, homie, unless you weigh like 1,000,000 pounds, that's not doing anything for you. It's just blowing your knees up, and it's not actually increasing your ability to move all that explosively in unweighted conditions. It's just making you really good at doing that. So it ends up being fuckery, like Mike said.
Question 4. Are there any other specific exercises you would recommend here outside of plyos, or any other strategy recommendation to transition effectively from strength to power/speed?
So the jump training is really good. You can include things like box jumps or plyometric jumps, depth jumps, things like that. Sprinting is also a good thing to add in, though if you haven't sprinted for a long time, I would be very, very cautious, and you would want to actually start incrementally prior to this phase, like even in your hypertrophy phases, start incorporating some very, very rudimentary sprint mechanics, because if you just go from no sprinting to sprinting, it's like guaranteed hamstring tear. It's going to happen. So don't do that. But if your body is accustomed to running and even to sprinting to some degree, sprinting is one of those just magical exercises that we can't quite figure out, that it seems to improve all athletic endeavors. It's magic. It's one of those we just don't really have a good explanation. If you give somebody sprints, they tend to do better in sport in general. I don't know. Go figure. But it does tend to be a good one. So that could be another exercise you could do, like as one of your B sessions on power during the week. You have like your A is kind of like a jump, and then maybe a squat or a squat jump or something like that. And then your B on that power session might be a sprint and a depth jump or something like that. Just don't go crazy on the volume. Keep the volumes relatively low. You want to maintain high levels of preparedness. The plyometric exercises are super fatiguing, even though they don't feel like they are. So you're going to keep the reps relatively low in check. Just keep mindful on your strength training. If you start to get any aches, pains, stuff like that, just be smart. Don't tough through it. The thing with the power training is like, once you get a ding on the exercise, like in terms of pain or aches, where you're like, ooh, it's not feeling so good, your chance of injury is just like through the roof, because the intensity is so high. You're making maximal effort movements in terms of force or speed. If you're hurting, let it go. Do something else.
Very, very good advice. Also, thank you for the tip regarding the spike in preparedness. No weights. They're basically saying like, hey, don't lift for a week or two, and you will get really, really good at sprinting and jumping because the fatigue will drop. I'll actually implement this in the final block to peak. Very good. Question 5, I was reading Harrison's question and noticed they reference integrated periodization of strength training and athletic development. Could you provide an overview of this and specifically how pragmatic it is? Is it any more granular than the RP Plus lecture series? Yes, it is more granular. James Hoffman is a co-author on that book, and I would read it if you want to get really in depth.
Wait, sorry, I don't think I understood the question.
He wants us to give an overview of the book, which is... The book has, just like if you look at the back of the book, it's got an overview right there. It's designed to teach you how periodization for poor sports occurs on a just grand scheme. And it's very, very highly in-depth and super recommended.
Yeah, so like the 1-minute version of that is we look at the training, the nutrition, the psychological preparation, and the recovery strategies, and how do we kind of make our annual plan incorporate all of those things in a phasic manner. That's the idea.
Okay. Question 6, I'm running a 12-week cut, but thinking to end it around 10 weeks, as the 10th week will be a deload week. Any issues with maintaining my lower calories? Key considerations are obviously muscle loss, but also transition to strength block. Maintaining a lower... The 10th week will be a deload week.
What's the other 2 weeks? Just transition?
Thinking to run a Chalky Cup, but thinking to end it around 10 weeks. The 10th week will be a deload week. I would end it at 9 weeks, so the 10th week can be a maintenance week. That's what my answer is.
Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion.
Yeah. Metal Paul says, Hey Ducks, question on sickness. Well, are you down with it? The RP Diet Book doesn't seem to have any advice on the matter. It sure doesn't. Number one, do you have any guidelines on how you eat when you're sick? Yes. Eat plenty of protein, drink plenty of fluids, eat to your hunger. If you want to eat more, eat more. If you don't, don't. And eat well. Eat nice, healthy foods, but also treat yourself a little bit. And then when you're not sick, you're good to go.
Yeah, I try to get like our clients when they report that they're sick, and they'll say like, I didn't eat much yesterday because I'm feeling sick. Like we try and say, like if you can get the protein down and it's not too much of a burden, try and do that. Even if you just have to have like some shakes throughout the day. And the shake's kind of nice because it's got the protein and fluids and, a bunch of other crap in there. So that's not a bad option. The problem is if you have like 3 shakes in one day, you're almost guaranteed to have diarrhea. So be easy on that. But that's always a good priority, protein.
Yep. He says, when sick during a mass and you can't eat anything during those days, how should you eat once you are better? Is it don't change anything at all, just get back into it? Or does it compensate those missed calories the next few days, eating an even higher surplus? So the thing is, there's no compensating, because if you compensate, your muscle protein synthesis isn't going to go any higher than it already is. So don't change anything at all. Just get back into it. You'll be a little lighter, and after a while, the body water will come back, and you'll be totally fine. So literally that's the thing is like, I used to do this kind of stuff all the time, and sometimes still do, is I don't want to call it overthinking, but just trying to over-prepare for something that is an auto-correcting problem. Being like, oh, I'm just going to fix this by doing this other thing now. Like, just get back onto it, and you'll be totally fine.
Totally agree.
We got an additional question. Can you?
So he just kind of commented like,
okay,
that last one, but he had some more questions.
I was wondering if you guys have some general guidelines on training and sickness. I recently got sick halfway through a meso, and it astounds me how little proper information there is on the subject or on unplanned canceling days during a meso. I hope there's a paragraph or even a chapter on the subject in the upcoming book. There are definitely some RP Plus videos about it. So the advanced hypertrophy videos I've been putting out have a chapter on deloading and stuff for fatigue management for being sick. First of all, when are you too sick to train? Usually internet shizzle says if it's above the neck, it's okay to train. Yep, correct. If it's below the neck, you're not trained. Correct. When we just say you aren't fit to train, if you have central symptoms, systemic symptoms, especially fever, etc., then don't train or don't train very hard. And if you are sick, but it's like a cold or whatever, I would just recommend some recovery sessions. That would be my best bet. And then it says if someone does get sick and cannot train, let's say at the start of week 4 of a 5-to-1 meso, they lose at least half the week of training, with the last part of the week still probably subpar. So they basically lost the whole of week 4 and still have week 5 ahead of them and then a deload. Would you be better off sticking to the plan and completing the 5-to-1 meso, or would it be better to cut it short, make it a 3-to-1 and start fresh from a 5-to-1 next week? You could do actually a couple things. I would just redo week 4 and then do week 5 and then do week 1. That's probably your best bet. But if you really got off track when you were sick, I would restart it and then start a new one. James?
Yeah, I think restarting at different points along the mesocycle is always a good idea. So if you're only out of commission for a couple days, you can just restart the week wherever you left off, right? If you are gone for like a week and it was like a week 4 or like a week 5 peak week type situation, you're better off either starting anew or maybe just backtracking to like week 2 and then building back up again. The worst thing you can do is have them be sick and have like a week off and then go immediately back into that peak week. I've made that mistake with some of my clients. It's always a disaster. It's better. You're better off just backtracking them a little bit, even to like weeks 2 or 3, and say, okay, let's just get this kind of more moderate week under our belt, and then we can try and do peak week. Or if they got the flu and they were just out of commission, deload, move on, and start a nice, clean, fresh one. Yeah,
great insight. Number 3, if you choose the 3-to-1, you've been sick half of your deload. How does it affect the deload? Would it be more like a 3 to 0.5? If you're sick half your deload, just see how the other half goes and then reassess. Like if at the end of the deload, half of it's sick, half of it not, you feel great, then go ahead and start another meso. If you're like, man, I really don't feel very deloaded, I felt like I mostly just recovered from being sick, then do another half week of relatively easy stuff. And then the next week, do half a week of training and then full week of training, so on and so on and so on.
Yes. I'm just reading ahead a little bit. Let's finish Metal Paul today, and then maybe we'll cut Sounds it off. Good.
And then go next time. Okay. Number 4, how does being sick during a deload week work with resensitization? Do you get the full resensitization effect, I suppose, since you haven't trained? Yeah, most of it, but you don't get a lot of the fatigue dropping that you wanted. So resensitization does occur, but the fatigue doesn't all go away, so it's not ideal at all.
And so the fatigue is going to be a bigger confounder in that point than the resensitization that you get. Like if you're just so fatigued from being sick, there's no point in trying to do a new meso. So just taking more time is probably the better option.
Number 5, Would the less than optimal due to sickness deload be okay? Accumulation was only 3 weeks and training did not reach 1 RIR. So I was planning a 5-week accumulation. Week 3 was probably 2 RIR. I think since that's accumulated fatigue, it's quite a bit less than planned since the less than optimal deload would be okay. Yeah, like again, it's up to how you feel at the end of that whole deload. But generally speaking, I would say it's probably going to be fine.
Yeah, I think that's fine too.
Number 6, when is it okay to train again? Right after you feel better or wait a few more days just to be safe? I almost always wait a few more days just to be safe. Honestly, there's actually a better answer than that. Ramp your training. Right after you feel better, go in and have like a deload part 1 type of training where you do some heavier weights, but very few sets, 4 RIR. See how you feel. Do another one of those days. See how you feel. And after like 2 or 3 of those days and then another rest day, you'll feel fucking amazing. And then start going back to 3 RIR, normal volumes, blah, 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 blah. So ramping is better than just being like, no train, no train, no train, no train, and then train full out.
I totally agree. And it's the same thing we recommend for people when they're injured, right? Like once your knee starts feeling better, do you just go start training hard on it again?
Right.
No, you wait a couple mesocycles and then go back to training that hard again.
And then you don't just wait and do nothing. You slowly ramp the training from easier to harder to harder to harder. And then eventually you cross that threshold of like what's normally hard and you're good to go. Don't just jump back in.
Okay, folks. So it looks like we're going to call it a day for today, but we're going to
look at my... I should just do all the podcasts like this so nobody knows what I look like.
And there's like children pictures above you. Like what?
Oh yeah, I'm at Nick Shaw's house. I'm visiting Mr. Shaw, and there's this pictures of his children everywhere.
Okay, well, note to self here. We left off on Sean Murakawa Rubin's questions. We got a few of those. We got Mercia, John Podesek, Kittner, some other people. So we got a few more questions to get through for this week, and then we're going to probably hit a handful of YouTube questions. So tentatively, Mike and I are going to try and knock part 2 out maybe tomorrow, and then hopefully get that stuff posted as soon as possible. So we appreciate you guys being patient. For those of you who are watching on YouTube, make sure you subscribe to the RP stuff. That way you get a little notification, or you at least see when all of our new videos come out, and you can enjoy. That's all I got. Mike, what do you got? Anything?
Generally speaking, as a human, I've got nothing.
I feel the existential struggle there.
Yes, but we will see you guys very soon with part 2 and YouTube.
All right.
I've been using the RP diet to fuel my weightlifting performance for years, and RP's simple, science-based approach has been instrumental to my success. With the new RP Diet app, following RP's principles is as easy as entering my goals and schedule and choosing my favorite foods. The app builds a diet to my exact needs, reminds me to eat my meals, and adapts to my body's changes every single day and week. The RP Diet app is a huge help in my quest to become the best athlete I can be, and if your goal is to be your best, it will help you.
All right, folks, we are back. Part 2 of the weekly webinar. If you're wondering what's going on, we were a little pressed for time last time, so we kind of did the first half earlier in the week, and today we're doing the second half of the questions and some of the YouTube questions. So we're just going to pick up right where we left off, and if you're confused, go back and see the first half of this week's webinar, and you'll probably get the questions that you were looking for. So let's get back to it. Boom.
Boom. All right. Actually, so James, I'm back home, so we don't. Oh, actually, you do that anyway, right? Okay.
I do it anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. So, first up for this, is my volume good or is it too high? Or
no, you're great. You're absolutely great.
One sec. Testing. Ooh, that's too much. Testing. Can you say anything, James?
Can I say anything?
Perfect. Okay. All right. Sean Murakawa Rubin says, hello, guys. Says casein is slower digesting the whey protein. Could casein possibly give benefits over whey when cutting? Mainly to keep full longer and keep MPS elevated longer between meals. If I recall, I think in studies whey generally outperforms casein, but I wonder if that might not be the case when there's much less food in the digestive tract throughout the day, such as during a cut. I know that lean meat sources would likely be better than both, maybe. But assuming shake was a must-do due to work. So really the answer, Sean, is like what you're using it for, and specifically what the meal frequency situation is. So if you have another meal in 2 hours or 3 hours, whey is probably better. If it's like 3 to 5 hours, casein and whey blend is the best. And if you don't have a meal for 6 or 7 hours or something, like you're at work and you just have to eat, then casein is the best alternative. So unfortunately, casein enters blood so slowly that a lot of times Unless you consume much more of it, it doesn't actually supply enough protein per unit time to maximize muscle protein synthesis. It's great for anti-catabolism. So actually, to answer your question more particularly, yeah, and a cut is actually really, really prized. Way in a cut sucks because you eat it and then
starving
you're
immediately,
starving to death, and great mission not accomplished. So yeah, absolutely, that's the case. It really comes down to meal frequency, and if the meal frequency fits the protein, then that's the best protein to use.
Yeah, and then sometimes too, it's not a bad idea to have some substantial amount of solid food throughout the day. You don't want to be getting a huge it's not like it's bad to get a lot of liquid food, but in terms of making sure you get enough fiber and stuff like that, and you're not having diarrhea all the time.
In the future, we won't have to eat. We'll do Star Trek food pills.
Or the Matrix, tasty wheat paste.
It's great.
Mm-hmm. It'll be like dog food, where they just engineer little kibble pellets for us. It's it's just perfect food.
Yeah, exactly. Number 2, in the same way that low responders benefit from increased training volume, do you think that low responders could also benefit from increased protein intake above the normally prescribed recommendations? I'm not sure at all. I don't think that has been studied, but there's two potential problems, or two potential roads I can go. One is yes, maybe. Another one is no, because they might actually just have a really muted MPS response to anything, and any extra protein is actually even more extra for them. But on average, for the average low responder, those two probably cancel out, and about the same amount of protein is probably wise. Now, people need different amounts of protein. They have different genetic variants that burn through protein faster, shuttle less of it to muscle, more to burning, so on and so forth. So I think if you're a hard gainer, you can certainly experiment with substantially more protein, maybe 1.25 or 1.3 times the amount you're currently eating, or that has been decided, a gram per pound. Go to a gram 0.3 per pound and then see how it feels. And if you get much better results, calorie equated, then you're going to be like, oh, wow, that really did work for me. It was very hard to pick up with an individual. But it might be worth doing because, it's one of these things when we say gram per pound, that's for the average person. Some people don't need more than 0.7 and they're totally fine. Some people probably could utilize 1.3 optimally. So you can definitely play around with it yourself. I don't know if there's a predictive direction there, James.
Yeah, Mike, I tend to agree with Mike on this one. I don't think that there's really any substantial reason to think that overeating protein would somehow compensate for a low response to exercise stimulus. So I would be inclined to say just do the normal stuff. Yeah. But you can always experiment. Like Mike said, you can always play around with it, but don't get your hopes. Don't think that, because how many people have had this epiphany? If I just eat more protein, will I get more jacked, right? Everybody's thought that at some point, and unfortunately it just tends to peter out after a certain point.
Yeah. It's funny too, because it's something we covered in the Renaissance Diet Book 2.0. That if I eat more of it, it'll do me better and better is actually more true for carbs than protein.
Right.
Protein, once you eat enough of it, eating more of it doesn't really do much. With carbs, eating more and more and more actually magnifies the insulin area under the curve response, and it keeps going up. So if you can eat 400 grams, great. 600 is even better, and so on and so forth. With protein, after whatever gram per pound, let's say you weigh 200 pounds, after 200 grams of protein, adding more protein, it's just not clear it does anything.
And it's actually just a legitimate challenge to eat more protein at that point, just to actually
and expensive.
Yeah.
Carbs and fat are cheap. All right, number 3. I know maintenance phases and primer phases are useful to dissipate accumulated fatigue from several cycles of training. Would this be applicable to beginners / early intermediates, or are they generally not capable of producing the amounts of fatigue necessary to warrant one of these phases? It is applicable to them, and what we've recommended in prior books, and something we'll be recommending again in the hypertrophy book, is that it's just the frequencies of doing these phases change. So an advanced lifter might need to do one every 3 mesos, intermediate one every 4 or 5, and a beginner maybe once after their first year of training, something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's also something to be said. We've said this on previous webinars too, of getting those beginners and intermediates into habits that are going to carry them throughout their training career, right? So it's not so much that they don't need to take these phases. It's that you want them to have this in the back of their mind because they're going to start needing to do it at some point more and more and more. So it just becomes a habit, a routine, something that they're familiar with and understand, and it carries them for a long time.
Yeah, because it'd be strange to just throw it in at some point. What the hell is this? Well, it's this new thing you have to do. They should always be aware of it if they're very serious, and then they just know that just don't do it as frequently as other people.
Mm-hmm. And then, like anything else, the need for it will become more self-evident.
Yes. You just won't be able to, your training block of 4 mesos just won't happen.
Yeah,
You'll do 3, and at the end of 3, you'll be like, I'm done.
Yeah. Okay, I have to apologize here. There's fucking landscapers in my neighborhood all day.
I can't hear them.
Every day. Okay. Well, to me, it's like blasting. I tweaked my mic a little bit, so hopefully that's doing good. But if it sounds shitty on my end today, I apologize in advance. These guys have been chainsawing or blowing every day for the last 2 fucking weeks, and it's driving me absolutely bonkers. Sorry in advance.
No worries, James. Honestly, I can't hear a fucking thing.
Okay, good.
Probably good. All right. Mircea Balai says, "Hi, docs. Regarding the volume landmarks, what's your opinion on the reverse engineering? What would your opinion be on reverse engineering the volume distribution from total body MRV? So you knew that in a balanced program, your total body volume landmarks are X, and you would distribute the volume to the muscle groups that you wanted to prioritize within the constraints of the individual volume landmarks.
Okay.
This way you know how many body parts you can prioritize, how many you can take to MRV, how many you can take halfway there, and which body parts would be MVV or MV. This would all be for experienced lifters that know the volume landmarks very well, and who have systemic MRV lower than individual body part MRV sum. P.S. Tell Steve to officially wink wink announce the 2020 London Seminar already. Yep, that was announced today, so that's happening.
There was
May 9th and 10th.
A Marvel-themed Instagram
Yeah,
post.
it's so cool. Finally, Jared and I will be able to fight Berto and Eric to the death.
You guys aren't going to fight Steve and Pascal? That's what I was hoping for.
That's fucked up. We 4-team gang up on Steve Pascal. They still ghost us. So here's the thing, Mircea, in hypothesis, yes, you can, and you sort of roughly should. The big problem occurs when not all the muscle groups have the same effect on systemic MRV, right? So quad volume does not translate to calf volume or forearm volume. So you can't treat the sets as one-to-one. You can't say my total body MRV is 100 sets because that actually doesn't mean anything. Calves, forearms, side delts, and rear delts, you can get to 100 sets, no problem. But if it's chest, back, and legs, you'll be dead at 80 sets per week or something like that. So there's got to be a little bit more, I don't want to say art, but a little bit more awareness of the individual differences in the muscles. But if you're an experienced person, you should absolutely have an idea of roughly what, your adjusted for body part or adjusted for how much each muscle group affects your systemic, roughly what that total number of sets is, or at least how many total muscle groups you could train at any one time. So you might think, I can train a total of 5 muscle groups for MVV and MRV, but if they're all big ones, it's 3, and if they're all really small ones, it's 7, right? And then you could just sort of, at some point, it's very difficult to quantify all these things very precisely. So you would have to just know, this is what's called training wisdom. Like if you take John Meadows into a gym and you give him a sample workout, be like, John, do you think this will work in your program? He'd be like, no, there's no way I'm recovering from that. Or he's going to be like, yeah, that's easy. That's totally fine. Or that's just right. I mean, he's not running a whole lot of numbers in his head. It's just he's done so many workouts that he knows what's too much. So you'll have to have some sort of subjective understanding of how much you can tolerate total. And then, you can sort of reverse engineer.
Yeah, so I like that question, and it's flawed in a way, and I in a good way. So here's kind of the thing and if that was over anyone's head, understandably so, it was a complicated one. So basically, the question is, can you start by taking what would be the volume that leads to systemic overreaching and work your way backwards towards the peripheral muscles that you want to train? So the reason why that is probably not going to work is because in hypertrophy training, the goal is to minimize a lot of the systemic spillover so that you can maximize the peripheral muscles being trained, right? You want to have the highest MRVs for the muscles that you want to either be training or enhancing or whatever. So working your way backwards from systemic is kind of a flawed concept because the whole point is to try and do things that minimize the chances of systemic overreaching in the first place. Now, that being said, that approach would be more appropriate for more traditional sporting endeavors where systemic is often the limiting factors, especially for sports that have a really heavy cardiovascular component. I think MMA, CrossFit, anything like that would be a really good example of saying okay, I can only train so much realistically per week or per month, right? And I have to kind of divvy that up into a variety of various activities that need to be fulfilled. That would be a more applicable that would be a better way of applying that strategy. I think bodybuilding is probably, or hypertrophy training in general, is just probably the worst way to go about that because usually your limiting factors are peripheral, not systemic, and you're doing everything to prevent that from happening. Whereas in other sports, your systemic is going to affect your preparedness in the areas of fitness, skills, and tactics. So something like rugby, which you can see in the background there, I'm watching some Super Rugby. Yeah, mate. I think that would be more appropriate, but I think it's still a little too nuanced. There's too much individual variation, too much individualization that needs to go on, where you could just apply some kind of math and work your way backwards. It's just, there's that human element that's too unpredictable.
Yeah. The spirit of the question is right on. Actually pulling it off is a little bit more complicated.
Yeah.
All right. John Podesiak says, hey, docs. Been a while, got a mix of personal and training questions for you this week. I almost thought it was going to be personal training questions, but that's actually new.
Yeah.
So, number one, what would you guess you'd be doing for a career if you hadn't gone down your current path? As soon as you give this some thought, you realize that anything you're answering there is pretend, because we really aren't so sure what in our lives caused us to zig or zag one way or the other. But
yeah. I can say, like, my plan was to do academics. I was planning on teaching for the indefinite future. And then, I mean, teaching I still enjoy, and I would still entertain doing it. But when life opportunities arise, for Mike and I, where it was like, okay, we can teach and do pretty well, or we could do more RP stuff, put in, like, I don't want to say put in half the effort, but like have our own schedules, our own work time flow that we want to manage and do a lot better. It was like, well, it's kind of a no-brainer in that case. So although we wanted to do academics, it was like, well, this is just a better situation. Like, why it's natural to change, in those cases.
To be honest, I think another way to say is that switch to RP full time was we could do more work and be rewarded way more for it. It's because at the university level, once you have all your courses written up and you don't change courses that often, gee whiz, professors don't really do a whole lot.
And what you do is a lot of just bureaucracy stuff, which is painful.
Kind of fucking waste. Yeah. I would, if a real alternate life, I could see myself going into career military. I think I would fit like a square peg in a square hole. Number two, what is the one thing each of you are currently working on to improve in both your fitness pursuits and personal, James?
Well, right now I'm doing a cut. Which I don't go super hard on the body comp stuff very often. I kind of have like a period throughout the year where I go a little bit harder, and a period throughout the year where I just take it easy and eat Costco muffins. So I'm doing that. I'm working on another Volume Landmarks project. I'm working on kind of a secret Moneyball project with Jake Reed on MMA. And I'm trying to incept one of my colleagues from Integrated Periodization, Scott Howell, to work on some tactical stuff with me when his workflow lightens up a little bit. So also I got my hands in a lot of little pots here and there.
What about personal?
I actually do a lot of, like, I don't want to call it self-help, but yeah, like self-help or conscientiousness type audiobooks. I'm really big into just listening to some of those things. A lot of it's just recognizing, like, that you're a piece of shit and everyone suffers. So, like, try to make yourself and everyone around you suffer a little bit less.
More. Less. I got it. Okay.
So that's kind of stuff that I've been, like, if you ever listen to, like, 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson, that's a really good one of just.
Isn't he a Nazi though?
God, it drives me nuts with that stuff. So there's like, there's the Jocko Willink book and the Jordan Peterson 12 Rules for Life. Those are the same book written by, like, an academic and a bro, right? It's the same message ultimately in a lot of the stuff. So stuff like that I'm really into. And most of it's just like putting on an audio book when I'm doing a cardio or when I'm lifting or something like that.
I am always making updates and changes and edits to the hypertrophy book, which Melissa Davis, Dr. Wife for James, is currently editing majorly. And we're also working on a ton of video content for you folks. And there may be some big changes coming to RP Plus. James and I will actually speak about that after we get off it.
Dun, dun, dun!
Yep. And personally, I have not done anything personally. I don't know. I spend time with my wife and try to cherish the fuck out of those moments because they're really nice. I don't know if that's working on anything. I'm busy with my professional stuff, so I don't have time for personal shit right now.
Yeah, I feel you.
I do masturbate quite a bit. So
I do too. Sometimes I actually have one of those foot scrubbers in the shower so I can buff my calluses out because I have injured myself more than a few times because my hands get too rough.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Training. Regarding rest times using the 4-question algorithm, I've heard calves use an example of a muscle that might only require very short rest between sets. Number one, for Mike, I'm curious if the way you prefer to do your leg press sets follows the same line of thinking. You've mentioned you personally always use very short breaks in between sets, like 4 to 5 deep breaths or something for a heavy compound movement like the leg press. Oh, sorry. You've mentioned you've personally always used very short rest breaks in between sets, like 4 to 5 deep breaths or something. Okay.
I don't think that would apply.
That's not rests. We'll see where we're going with this. For a heavy compound movement like leg press, I find it surprising that this would tick all 4 boxes for being fully recovered. It doesn't. Also, I don't do that. It seems like it would be a more metabolite-focused strategy, but I doubt that's the case. So what makes the exercise well-suited for shorter rest? For me personally, it doesn't. I take 5 fucking minutes between each set of leg press. Now, when I do leg press, sometimes I keep going and take little mini breaks in the same set. That's like 2 or 3 big breaths and go, 2 or 3 and go. And that just allows me to get, work in that really close to failure range for longer and get really a ton of stimulus. But that sort of thing only works for so long because at some point the systemic fatigue gets so high that it's going to start limiting you, even if you rest a little long enough for the peripheral. And even the peripheral fatigue at that point is just limiting. So it's kind of a cool way to flirt with that close to failure range. It's like turning almost every set of leg press into like a mini Meyer-up sort of situation. And the only reason it works is because in leg presses you can lock out completely and actually rest the muscle significantly for a short time. If you have the cardio for it, then it can push you a little bit further locally. If you don't have the cardio for it, it doesn't matter because you like, James, you ever done that? Lock out for 2 or 3 seconds, and then you're like, I'm going to throw up, and you just lock back in, like you're just like rack. You're like, nothing's happening.
No.
Nobody does that with squats, right? You don't stand with squats because the bar's crushing you the entire time, and it's just like your back can't handle that sort of thing. So yeah, John, that clear that up. Number 2, stemming from the prior question, I struggle with the implications of question number 1 for determining rest times. Has the target muscle locally recovered enough to do at least 5 reps on the next set? Scenario 1, let's say for calves at 100 pounds, you rest 15 seconds and you're fully recovered using all 4 questions. Your reps go 20, 10, 8, 6. Scenario 2, let's say still at 100 pounds, you rest longer and the minimal possible rest time, maybe 30 to 60 seconds, and your reps go 20, 15, 13, 11. Same as in the first scenario. Maybe the discrepancy in this example is so large because it suggests there is not full recovery, 95%-ish occurring in scenario 1 because scenario 2, not so many more reps. Question in my head, is the stimulus equal for both? So the stimulus is going to be very, very similar for both because of the effective reps concept, right? The faster fibers, and most fibers, are recovered well enough to put in the kinds of reps that are the most hypertrophic, but not completely recovered. So those sets that you're resting 30 to 60 seconds instead of 15 would be more hypertrophic, but not by a ton. Maybe by 25%, but you're resting between 2 and 4 times as long for measly 25%. If you're interested in maximal hypertrophy and saving time in the gym, you can just do 6 sets instead of 4, get the same hypertrophy with version 1 and version 2, and be out in fucking third of the time. That's the thing is like, if you rest 10 minutes between sets of squats, is each set more hypertrophic than if you rest 3? Yes. By a small fraction. But how long are you waiting? 2 minutes versus 5? Fuck that. That's so much time that you can, and it's not like, well, you still get more size. No, because if you're looking at total time, you could just do more sets. You can do more sets. Now, there is a limit to that. They have shown that if you rest not long enough for the systemic factors to all be corrected and for local to not be stimulative anymore or to not be the limiting factors, then you actually get a lot less hypertrophy per set, and you end up roughly equating, like you could do 10 sets or you could do 3 and it's the same hypertrophy and it takes the same amount of time because you're resting so little between each of the 10 sets. That's fucking stupid, and that's just doing a whole lot more work for seemingly no good fucking reason at all. Like, do you want to be resting very short and training, or do you want to be like mostly just resting and only having to try 3 times and you get the same muscle growth in the same time? Yeah, so that's why we have that 4-part question. So once all 4 parts are good, that next set is going to be comparably hypertrophic, and any more you wait for sure gives you more hypertrophy, but by a small fraction, and you wait a long time for that shit to happen. In other words, when you're done with a 4-factor checklist, somebody can say, why aren't you doing another set? And you're like, because I'm not going to get the most out of it. And they could honestly say, like, what if you come back tomorrow and do another set, you'll give even better per set hypertrophy? And you're like, yeah. So why don't you do that? Well, because fuck, man, I'll never get to 20 sets a week if I do 1 set every day. I'll just get to 7. And like, that's the fundamental problem. So it's a hypertrophy optimality and time efficiency constraint So in other words, it's the raw stimulus magnitude is going to be the same, and the stimulus to time ratio is going to be the same. So what's the point of fucking resting longer? And if you rest longer, the stimulus to time ratio starts to go down the fucking drain. Yeah, if you like 3-hour workouts, fine, sweet. Then you'll have other problems, like working out for 3 hours probably independently systemically fatigues you on top of everything. James?
Yeah, and this is something that James Krieger actually highlighted recently when asked about like why is there comparable hypertrophy on some of these different studies with different sets. And really the kind of the short and dirty is what Mike just said is like, yeah, the hypertrophy is comparable. You might be getting a slightly better stimulus by waiting longer, but it's nothing that can't be accommodated just by doing another set or two. And then it's basically identical at that point. Yeah. So it's kind of pick your poison on that. Some people really like to feel like high levels of preparedness on every single set, and that's cool. If you don't want to be in the gym all fucking day, like you can just add 1 to 2 sets of whatever you planned on doing and just take slightly shorter rest, and it's probably going to be damn near the same, if not immeasurably different.
Yeah. And so the question is the stimulus equal for both? No, the stimulus is higher for the scenario 2, but in that time you could do 1 to 2 more sets of scenario 1, and the stimulus would be equal for both. Next sub-question is one likely better than the other? Well, one is much more time efficient in your example, and one is much more a little bit more hypertrophic. But you can get to a place where scenario 1 becomes both equally hypertrophic and considerably more time efficient, means it's better for everything. And then he says, if they're basically equal, wouldn't scenario 1 always be preferable because you just have to do less work overall to get the same benefit? True, but there is no free lunch, right? Doing more work does help, but it doesn't help nearly as much as you would think. And then the last question is there a cutoff where drop in reps would suggest insufficient recovery, or is it really just as long as they're over 5, probably insignificant? Well, the under 5 is the insufficient recovery, right? And also, it's not about the rep drop. At some point, yes, just for that factor, if you're over 5, you're good because you're getting most of those effective reps. However, make sure that all the other checklist items are good to go, because a lot of times if you rest really short, yeah, you get over 5 reps, but the other factors are not good to go. So turns out you are still breathing heavy. Turns out your nervous system wise, you're not ready to try hard again. Turns out your other muscles are limiting factors, right? So if you check all those boxes and you're good to go, then those sets are just a little bit less hypertrophic, but you rest so much less time that you can squish in more sets and you'll be good to go.
I do think too, and I don't want to get too deep into this side of the conversation, but I do think there is some merit, like when in doubt in some of these situations, you can say like when in doubt, it's not a bad idea to rest longer and just make sure you're getting out. But at the same time, when in doubt for hypertrophy training, something that you should always be thinking about is like, am I pursuing a really good pump? Am I pursuing a really good metabolite burn? Like, am I feeling it? And if you are resting so long that you really don't get a huge pump going from that movement, you're probably resting a little bit too long on average. Like if you just get pumped from immediately putting the weight down and then it goes away completely, I would say there actually might be some merit into shortening that rest and pursuing that pump, pursuing that burn a little bit more when you're doing hypertrophy training. When you're doing strength training, you're probably going to do more rest and elevate preparedness on each set a little bit more. Hypertrophy training, I would say, lean towards chasing that pump a little bit.
To add to James's point, when in doubt, rest longer. But when not fucking in doubt for sure, stop fucking resting. Yeah. Like if you're literally sitting around and someone's like, another set of squats, you're like, it says I should rest 3 minutes. And I'm like, how do you feel? You're like, I feel fucking 100%. Like, well, the fucking go. Mm-hmm. But if you're like, should I go? No, don't go. Rest until you're ready. And fundamentally, it's going to be like, okay, is my synergist, are they good? My lower back feels fine. Okay. Are my lungs burning or are they not? No, they're not. Okay, good. Do I feel, and this is a central nervous system indicator, like does my brain feel like I can fucking push? Because, you know, that defeated feeling after a set where you're like, oh, thank God. You don't want to go if you still have that. Like if you still look at the leg press and you're like, nope, rest more. And then once you have all those checked away and you can for sure get another 5 reps, you're fucking golden.
What do they call that in weightlifting? I think they call it Clarking it, where you go to do the pull and you just pick it up and put it back. You just deadlift it and you're like, nope.
Fuck that.
Nope, not happening.
All right. James Kittner. Hey, docs. I've asked and answered my own questions here a couple of times, as you've covered most of it in your recent webinar, but I want to make sure my thinking is correct. After trying to ask the question on YouTube, I just renewed my subscription to RP Plus, because YouTube.
Yep.
Little background, I used to be fit, but always a little heavy with 18 to 20% body fat equaling 205 pounds. That's pretty good. Well, flat stomach and some ab shape. Fuck you for having that at 18 to 20% body fat.
Yeah, really, dick. Yeah, I wonder if he has like a really fat ass.
Ooh, have daughters. When it's fucked up, right?
It's funny. It's not that bad.
It's funny too, because like when you see like a male with like a big fat ass and like a lot of lordosis, you're like, man, that really sucks that you're like that. But when you have kids, goddamn, if you have daughters, you're gonna get a lot of attention. All right. When I returned to school when they're of age, of course.
Yeah, and by that time you're going to be like the creepy old man, right? So either way you spin it, it's like
I'm already the creepy old man. That's right, exactly. Have daughters. I mean, for when they're adults. I mean, I'm just going to shut up. You're telling this to him, and he's like, I don't even know you. You're like, I just noticed you had a fat ass. This is all like on a train in New York City.
Aren't you Dr. Mike? Man. Like, shit.
Oh, yeah, I am. What's up, man? He's like, hey, I love your YouTube shit. When I returned to school to finish my undergrad, I became less motivated to train because my brain hurt. Who's hurting you? After 2 years, mostly off, a steady 220 to 230 pound weight with no real attempt at weight loss, I have a problem. In order to pay for school, I'm reapplying to the military reserve, though I look fine in my clothes and my weight and waist won't cut it. That's for sure true. I want to see if I'm thinking correctly. After trying to program hypertrophy meso, I became frustrated with tempering volume due to sensitivity to quote-unquote injury, back pain mostly. Remember, like when you have pain, but there's not actually something mechanically wrong with you, that's actually not injury. While chasing an upwardly moving calculated 1 rep max, I would follow the landmarks, but my next effort would sometimes be super easy, and I would jump 20 pounds week to week in the squat as I progressed. I'm sure I'm just realizing some previous fitness, but this made it hard to program volume appropriately, as I could easily overdo it session to session. To correct this, I returned to a beginner template to simplify and return to whatever strength level I have currently, and my progress has been much more stable. I would like to progress to a more volume-based hypertrophy plan using the numbers generated from a few months of training and focus on the 10 to 20 meat and potatoes rep range to try to capitalize on the HIIT-like effect this training may provide to quote-unquote get in shape without doing the cardio I already don't have time for. I don't want to drop 3 days a week on weights and can't cut calories too far as the brain drain effect is real in school and I only have to realistically lose 20 to 30 pounds over several months to be fit enough for reserve standards. This approach seemed reasonable.
Can I clarify something really quick? So is this the question, is that he wants to go back to school. The only way that he can pay for it is by re-signing up with the military, but he's like too out of shape for the military fitness standards. Is that correct?
He wants to know if he can do basically hypertrophy training to get there without a whole lot.
Okay, that's what I thought. I just wasn't sure.
Yeah, this approach seemed reasonable. I would like to have a solid training base in the bank when my graduate classes begin in fall 2020 and not be tubby when the recruiter finally asks how much I weigh. I could just say screw it and crash diet and run the weight to 190 pounds. It's been done before, but I'm not a 29-year-old staff sergeant anymore. And my wife would kill that guy, but being back in the gym has some positive effects on my mood and school stress, and I would prefer to someday see what's under the fat layer as I go through my master's. And get to call myself doctor too. I feel like a more sustainable plan is called for. And then the rest is a couple other questions. So let's just answer this one. It depends on when you need to qualify with your recruiter. You should just know how much you have to weigh and how small your waist has to be and make sure you're on track to meet it. And you have to do as much dieting, as much cardio, as much hypertrophy training, which your fundamental approach is fine. But you might have to do a little bit more cardio here and there. You might have to do a little less food here and there to make sure you're on track to progress. And I would try to qualify earlier than you actually have to so that you have some buffer space. My students back at university were coaching a variety of ROTC folks and other people who had various other military scholarships. And I've seen folks actually fail to get any of their money because they just mistimed their diet or essentially started it too late and just couldn't get in shape, and the Army told them to go fuck themselves. So I would say stay ahead of the curve rather than behind it. Your approach fundamentally works, but you might have to diet. And caffeine can help your brain when you're dieting, James.
So I agree with Dr. Mike. You really want to clarify when you're going to have to qualify for some of your fitness standards. Now, I know that they recently changed the fitness standards, and I'm probably out of the loop on that. I remember what they were back in the day. But here's the thing. Dieting takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. And a lot of the things that will help you score well on your test and your body comp and your actual tests is just being leaner, right? Like you have to run some of those tests are like pull-ups, push-ups, sit-ups type movements, just not being super heavy and super fat tends to help with those things. Here's the other thing that's worth considering. A lot of people who try to qualify often try to incorporate all the event training into their weight loss training. It only takes you like a month or a month and a half to get good enough to do a decent 1 mile run, to get good enough to do like decent muscle push-up and endurance tasks, to get decent enough to do a few pull-ups. You know what I mean? So what I would say is really focus on getting your weight under control through good diet, hypertrophy, and getting in some really basic cardio. Don't try and incorporate all the fitness standard stuff in until you're a couple months out, and then you can get your running legs, you can get your whatever the new tests are. I'm clearly out of the loop on what they've been updated to, but if there's something like push-ups and pull-ups and 1 mile run, that doesn't take a whole lot of time to prepare for. Maybe a month or maybe 2 months if you need a little bit more help. So what I'm trying to say is, like, don't try and cram all of your event training into your weight loss diet. Focus on getting your weight under control, and then start incorporating those things once you know that the test is coming up in a certain amount of time.
Yeah, very good answer. And then he says, thanks for providing the service at this price. I followed Dr. Mike since before Jug Life was a thing, and maybe I can finally stop stalking Steve Hall for Jared Feather's interviews. And for the record, I think it would be interesting to see Dr. James at Men's Warehouses. I've only ever seen him full body up in the Sports Scientist podcast, and he doesn't seem like the type to suit up. Just saying, he actually is exactly the type to suit up, and James is a very, very keenly dressed man when he wants to be, as opposed to myself. James and I almost always dress exactly the same, which is to say, fitness-based homeless person.
Mm-hmm.
But James can dress up, likes to, and does it well. Meanwhile, my wife and Charlie have to help me not look ridiculous.
I have to say, though, the last couple times that I've seen you dress up, you've looked very sharp. So
credit to Charlie.
Doesn't matter how it gets done. All that matters is that it gets done, right?
Yeah. When I had my suit built for your wedding, James, I showed up with Charlie, and they talked to me, and I was like, and I just point to Charlie, and he's like, anyway, I'll be speaking for this man, blah, 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 and you're going to want that, blah, 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 and then the suit shows up, and it's perfect.
Sweet. Yeah, just the way that they do it now with like the online stuff makes it so easy. Like you just pick what you want, you go in, get your fitting, they send it to you, you go back, get an adjustment, done.
When I walk in, though, they're always like, are these measurements correct? And then they see me, they're like, okay.
I get that too, where they're like, sir, you can't buy a suit off the rack. I'm like, yes, that's why I'm here, getting a custom suit, dickheads. Like, of course I can't.
Christ.
Because it's like, okay, you got like fucking like whatever, 60-inch chest and like 34-inch waist. They're like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm here getting help.
Yeah, come on, folks. Joshua Bradshaw, Terry Bradshaw's long-lost son, says, hey, Mike and James, questions regarding exercise sequencing. What are your thoughts on putting a movement that tends to cause a lot of muscle damage early in the workout? Do you think it causes a significant amount of drop-off in force production for later movements in the session? Yes.
Maybe, yeah.
A good example would be putting SLDLs or good mornings at the beginning of a leg session. You have something like ham curls later on. In the majority of cases, I would say performing the most complex movement first. For beginners and intermediates, maybe even early advanced is the way to go. However, something eccentrically dominant like an SLDL may really hinder the rest of the hamstring volume due to the damage it creates from the stretch. However, I feel that placing the volume before, let's just say it's coming from leg curls, might not impede performance on the SLDL GM to any considerable degree. That's absolutely false. It will crush performance on the SLDL GM to a huge degree. And because that is the exercise that probably has the higher SFR of the two, or at least the highest raw stimulus magnitude, it's totally fine to put it first. And then he says, I've ran it both ways on separate mesocycles. Each time the total volume performed seems to come out in favor of placing eccentrically dominant exercises later in the session. I'd love to get your thoughts on this. I hope you guys are doing well. Thanks, as always. So another way to say eccentrically dominant is also, it is to say very stimulative. And your degree of stimulus from the something that is eccentrically really dominant, that requires high forces, can be lessened by putting hamstring isolation first, and you don't generate as much force and you cannot impose as much damage. But remember, we're not going for damage necessarily, but you might just not be able to impose a lot of stimulus. What I'll say is this: exercise order doesn't really mean a ton if you're using fundamentally very stimulative movements that aren't super fatiguing, both of which are, until and unless you have a systemic fatigue cap. If you have a systemic fatigue cap, doing curls before stiff-legged deadlifts is a good idea, because it can give you roughly the same stimulus without as much fatigue. Or maybe a little bit less stimulus, but the stimulus to fatigue ratio might be a little bit better from a systemic perspective, not a local perspective. But if you want the highest raw stimulus magnitude, and fatigue is not a concern for you, especially axial fatigue and systemic fatigue, then doing stiff-legged deadlifts first, probably a wiser move, and then doing hamstring isolation after, because they are probably have a higher raw stimulus magnitude, and you want to sort of put the meat and potatoes first and then do the extra shit after. You can overload real easy on stiff-legged deadlifts, and then you'll be just fine on hamstring curls because, you know, how much overload you're supposed to impose on them isn't even that much to begin with. They're just not that hard to do. But if you do leg curls first, it can really throw off your swag in stiff-legged deadlifts after. That might be worth it, though, if your systemic fatigue cap is so low that you can't actually stiff-legged deadlift what you're supposed to fresh, because that would be so limiting systemically and axially. So you have to find out first, what are you going for more? Raw stimulus magnitude or stimulus to fatigue ratio from a systemic perspective? If you have the fatigue to spare, raw stimulus magnitude, you should do compound first, isolation after, although really both are fine. If your systemic fatigue is really limiting, you should probably do the hamstring curls first and then the stiff-legged deadlifts or RDLs after, James.
Yeah, so like in strength and conditioning, there's a clear exercise order delineation that we follow, right? Where it's like you have the movements that have the most muscle mass, most joints, and hardest technique generally comes first, and you work your way down in kind of like decreasing order of those things. So you start with something that's going to be really like a lot of muscle, a lot of joints, really complicated, like a squat, for example, and then kind of work your way down to less muscle, less joints, less complicated movements throughout the session. In hypertrophy training, that's not a bad rule to kind of carry over, but it's not an absolute rule in hypertrophy training, because the preparedness of any of those movements doesn't really matter so much as long as you're providing a really good stimulus. And like Mike already talked about, like kind of the local versus systemic fatigue factors. So it's a good like general practice to start with kind of your biggest, most complex movements so that your technique is always really good. And they're probably, as Mike already said, going to probably provide you with the biggest raw stimulus anyway and work your way down. But it is not, in strength and conditioning, that's the golden rule. In hypertrophy training, it's a suggested rule, but not an absolute rule.
Yeah. And what do I want to say about this? He says here, each time the total volume performed seems to come out in favor of placing eccentrically dominant exercises later in the session. If you're equating sets, yes. But you don't have to equate sets. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Equating fatigue, now we have a very good question to answer. Right? If you say for the similar amount of fatigue imposed, which one of these has the best stimulus? That's a good question. Same number of sets, you'd be like, well, who the fuck is telling you can only do 7 total sets? Why don't you do 8? And like, okay, with 8 sets, I still get less fatigue on this other way. It takes just a little bit more time, but the stimulus is better. So the stimulus to fatigue is better. That's the real question.
Yeah. And sorry, just we can move on from this one, but just like an example where that might be good is like, let's say you did, if doing like hamstring curls really allows you to feel the hamstrings on a hip hinge movement, which normally you struggle with. Like if you're like, dude, 45-degree back raise, all I feel it is in like my butt and in my back. But if you do the hamstring curls first and now you're like, oh my God, I feel it where I've never felt it before. That's a good application of that.
Yep. Because it enhances the stimulus. It potentiates it on the next exercise.
Absolutely.
All right. Aiden says, question 1. What do you think about fitness classes? Do they violate the overload principle? Are they just a good way for average people to get up and do something? Yeah, they don't violate the overload principle unless you're in too good of shape. Ooh, I just moved this. Do they violate the overload principle? Only for people that are in too good of shape to be doing them. So if you can go to a fitness class and not breathe heavy or anything, then they do for you. But a lot of people, people barely crawl out of those classes. They sure as hell violate the overload principle. But I'd be a little bit more concerned about specificity principle, James.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say. Is like the principles are defined contextually, right? So they have to be, overload is constrained by specificity. So it's only a violation if it's not within the realm of specificity for the activity or the goal that you want. So if you have people who are just trying to be like fit and healthy people, that's perfectly fine. If you have somebody who's trying to be like a world-class pole vaulter, that would absolutely be a violation.
Yeah. Question number 2. As you become less sensitive to muscle growth as you go through the block of training, what do you think of the idea of decreasing the monthly weight gain of each mesocycle? For example, meso 1, 1.5 to 2% gain per month, meso 2, 1.5% gain per month, and then meso 3.
Does he mean loss? Oh, decreasing monthly weight gain. Sorry, never mind.
Yeah. I think that there's a typo in Meso 3, but I get what you're saying. Let's say it's 1% per month or something like that, right?
Yeah, probably meant 1 to 1.5, I think.
Yeah, that's a fine idea. It also makes eating easier because it's easy to eat a lot in the first Meso, and the second you're like, man, and the third you're like, fuck this. And so like this actually is a self-solving problem. Check this out. If you just gain in raw weight instead of in percentages. So you just say, I'm going to gain a pound per month, or sorry, a pound per week or whatever through my whole mesos. When you weigh 200 pounds, a pound per week is a lot. When you weigh 220 pounds, whatever number of weeks later, a pound per week is less of a fraction. So it's kind of an auto-solving thing. But if you do want to decrease the magnitude of gain, you can. Another thing is, though, as you become less sensitive to muscle growth, as you go through a block of training, we also increase the volume of stimulus. So we might be able to counterbalance that. And remember, in the first meso, it's not like we're blasting. We start at minimum effective volume with very few sets and reps. So it actually, a well-designed block has roughly the same hypertrophy per week in any really given week, right? Or in any meso, it's got the similar hypertrophy per meso, because in meso 1, we don't want to blast full tilt because we'll burn out. In meso 2, we're well on our way, and in meso 3, we pull out all the stops, right? So it turns out hypertrophies are probably pretty similar between all these. So it's a self-solving problem. Combine that with just gaining a certain amount of weight, like 0.5 pounds or 1 pound per week, and that gives you most of your solutions there without having to do changing percentages.
Yeah, that was really good. I tend to just be more of a streamlined person on these things. It seems like it's needlessly complicated. So, I mean, even if you did, let's say 2% month 1, 1.5 month 2, and then 1% month 3, like throughout the block of the mass, you just averaged 1.5. So why not just like run that 1.5 average instead of changing your calories all the goddamn time? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That would be my, like, that's not to say that that's a bad approach, but it's also, to me, it's like an impractical approach, because now every single time you're going to have to go back and recalculate the change in weight that you've seen week to week relative to how much calories that you should be taking in. What a pain in the ass. You know what I mean? So like, why go through all the hassle?
Question 3. What do you think of Hani Rambod and his training methods? I think one of them was called FST7, which he uses all the time in his athletes. Here we go. A couple things. By no means clear he uses it all the time in his athletes. I'm not really sure what he does with his athletes. What folks of that caliber say they do and what they actually do is two very different things.
That's the stretch one, right?
Yes. So perfect underhand pitch. FST7 means Fascia Stretch Training System 7. Fascia stretching is probably not related to hypertrophy at all, so that's baseless right off the gate. The 7 stands for at least like 7 drop sets that you do in an exercise during that time. Why 7? Who the fuck knows? I would say that instead of focusing on what Hani Rambod does, listen, the reason Phil Heath is something to do with what Hani tells him to take as far as drugs, but not much probably to do with training. And if you ever see Phil Heath train, it's not anything you would ever want to do yourself. He's not big on overload, certainly not on weight used, and he's super gifted, so he doesn't have to pursue optimal training to get his best results.
I did FST7 when I was like an undergrad in college. I didn't do the whole program, but I tried elements of it, just for fun to see how it was. And I remember doing the chest day, and it was just pain. It was just needless, awful pain. And I was like, why am I doing this? I could just be like lifting more at this point. Instead, I'm doing all this bullshit that hurts like fuck.
Yeah. It's one of these things like, how do I put this politely? I suppose I don't really have to put it politely. If you sit down Hani Rambod with somebody who's been studying exercise science for 2 or 3 years, he won't be able to answer a variety of pretty obvious questions about his training. I don't consider someone like that a thinker as far as training is concerned. Put it this way, you put him and Eric Helms in the same room, and you're going to have an expert and a guy who yells at people and tells them to do stuff. So it's not, I wouldn't.
You mean the latter being Eric Helms?
Yeah, that's right. I just wouldn't. I would just file under not serious thinker. It's like people ask, like, what was it? Like my debate with Greg Doucette. Like, what do you think about Greg Doucette? I don't. And I get a good reason why I don't think about his training methods, because he doesn't either. And what he thinks is thinking is actually just yelling, and with 3-sentence questions, he can't justify his own views on anything. So, it's nice. People are jacked. They take drugs. They have good genetics. They get really lean, and yay. And how many people have they coached that have amounted to anything?
And he's coached a bunch, but it's probably not because of his training. It's because of drugs and because he selects the right athletes. Once you've coached Mr. Olympia, you get all the cream of the crop asking for what you want to do. And a lot of it's not very complicated. It's unfortunately the stark reality there. So you can look into his method and see if you can pick out good parts. I'm sure they're good parts. So I just wouldn't overthink it, because I sure as hell promise you Honey Rampant's not overthinking it.
All excellent points there.
Question 4, I've seen RP have released an at-home workout plan. Could you give a brief overview of how someone can do something like this and build muscle? Also, how is it organized / how do you progress? I have a family member who can't get to the gym and doesn't want to pay for anything, LOL. Well, they're going to have a problem with that because you have to pay for the workout plan. But all you need is a couple dumbbells, and it's basically sort of circuit training supersets, compound antagonist supersets. Back to back to back to back. It's designed primarily for females, although males can use it, especially if they're just starting out. It's fucking brutal. It's super duper hard, very short rest, but it doesn't take very long. And 3 to 5 workouts per week that last 30 minutes to an hour are going to get you in fucking unbelievable shape, especially if you're small or female. So that's really just the reality. And if that sounds like something a person wants, I will say this. If your family member can't get to the gym, okay. If they don't want to pay for anything, that's a little bit of a bad sign, because that means there's a problem with commitment. And I do mean that. Like, if you're like, well, there's no way I'm going to pay for fitness. Can you imagine being like, oh, I really want to be a good fiction writer? And someone's like, do you want a typewriter or a computer? Like, oh, no, I'm not going to pay money for any of that stuff. You're like, I feel like you really don't want to write anything. You know what I mean? Or like, I want to be a recorder, like a recording artist. Be like, do you want to buy some studio time? Like, nah, I don't need any of that. You're like, okay. It's kind of a prerequisite to, like, pay for something if you really want it bad enough. So if that person doesn't want, that's not great. And also the program only works if you train pretty hard. And if that person's not ready to train hard, it's kind of shit. I will say that the family member who can't get to a gym and doesn't want to pay for anything is so ubiquitous. I've ran into so much of that with friends and family of my friends. There are a bunch of people who mistake bitching to you for commitment. So be like, oh, God, how do you do it? And you're like, well, just do what I do. And they're like,
You fucking do it. You know what?
Yeah.
Everybody's got excuses. Not everybody gets shit done. At the end of the day, like, it costs money, it costs time, it costs effort. If you don't want to do it, fuck off. That's fine. But
our customer service guy, Jacob, Yasha, James, this is awesome. He was, for the first time ever, like back 10 years ago, he got really, really in shape for the first time, like lost like 70 pounds or something, right? And he's kept it off more or less since. And some of his family members were for dinner, and he showed up, and they're like, oh my God, you look amazing. And he's like, yeah, like, what have you been doing? Like, what's the trick? And he's like, well, eat healthier and in moderation, and you exercise. They're like, yeah. Like, oh, I would do that stuff, but like, I have a job. And he's like, motherfucker, I got a job. What the fuck do you think I do for, like, I have a fucking day job. What the fuck is wrong with you? Like, you think I'm fucking homeless, derelict because I got in shape? Like, that's just, a lot of people, it's just how they think. And when they complain to you, they'll say, oh, like, oh, I want to get in shape. And then you're like, oh, you can do this. And they're like, oh, that sounds hard. I just want to bitch slap the fuck out of me. Shut the fuck up. You'll never be in shape, ever. And I don't give a fuck about you because you don't give a fuck about you.
Yeah. I'm not trying to criticize who even asked this question. I don't even know, Aiden. I'm not criticizing you, but it's one of those things, like, don't put too much effort into people who are just willing to take any excuse not to put in the work. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Like, we all have excuses. Everyone has a reason not to do it. You have to choose to do it and put the effort and get it done. There's no way around it. No excuses at that point. You know what I mean? Just do it. That's it.
Shelby Starnes used to say, it's a very, very elite bodybuilding coach, Shelby Starnes used to say, if I send you a diet and your first question is, where are the cheat meals? You're not going to be a pro bodybuilder.
Yeah. And like, those are real conversations we have with our RP clients, where the first, that's not unusual for somebody to say, like, can I snack on stuff all day? When can I have my first cheat meal? It's like, you need to just put that out of your mind. Or
snacking is what got you.
Or maybe you should just keep snacking for now and come back and see me in 2 months when you're done snacking for a little bit, when it's out of your mind. And that's a good, that's perfectly fine too.
Philosophically done snacking. You know what I mean? Like, when you're done with whatever bullshit you think is going to, like, you're attached to.
Yeah. Get it out of your system and come back when you're ready to put that on the back burner for a little while.
It's like somebody, like, kills your whole family, like ninja style. And you're like, I'm going to Japan to learn under a master so I can get elite and kill them in honor. And like, great. And you show up to Japan and you're like, do I have to take my shoes off the mat? Cause like, I really, diseases are kind of gross. Like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Like,
yeah. Yeah, I wish it was, the thing is, like, if it was easy, then we wouldn't have an obesity problem. That's the thing.
Sure.
It's not, and it requires effort and determination and willpower, all those things. So,
yeah. Question 5, what helped you in personal training career in terms of eating between clients? Protein bars And scheduling your clients well. Take one client to 1:50 p.m., start the next client at 2:05 p.m., and you got 15 minutes. And pre-prepare your meals, bring them with you. Choose things like protein shakes and sandwiches, and you're good to go. James?
Yeah, we get this a lot with our clients too, where people will say like, oh, I'm a medical doctor, I can't eat for 10 hours a day. And it's like, that's bullshit. You can have a shake, you can have a bar, you can suck down like a sandwich and take a 5-minute bathroom break. There's nowhere in the world where you cannot use the bathroom where they can like legally withhold you from taking like a 5-minute break. You know what I mean?
Yeah, unless you're like a neurosurgeon and you do surgery for 12 hours. And you don't do one of those every day.
And to be honest, I think like if push came to shove, they could take a break if it was like a 10-hour thing.
Sure.
You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
they just choose not to because they have integrity and they want to do a good job. All those things. So, like, I'm very not sympathetic to people who say like, I can't eat at certain times. Like, you know how many fucking like road trip sandwiches I have sucked down, or, like it takes 2 seconds to eat something. Just do it.
Yeah.
I don't like when people say that. Like, I don't have time to eat.
Yeah.
Like, eat a bar.
Yeah. Any tips with conversing with clients would be great. I would say that keeping their attention on the session is number one, encouraging them and giving them feedback on the set, and keeping a good pace. So the thing is, with most clients, almost all personal training clients should be, and those are very, very much a big belief of mine, should be trained with compound antagonist supersets, which means them motherfuckers don't get a chance to talk to you much. You little bitch, you pay me $80 an hour. I don't imagine you pay me for my fucking conversation skills. Let me guess, you pay me to get as good a shape as possible in that fucking hour. Yes, then we're going to work your dumb ass. You're going to do bench, and then you're going to do rows, and you're going to do squats, and then you're going to do pull-ups, then you're going to do upright rows, and you're going to do curls, and blah, 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 blah. And there's 30-second break here where they're like gasping for air, and you're saying to them, hey, that was a great set. You did super well. Next time I want your hips a little further back. Got it? And they're like, yep, got it. Okay. All right, cool. Here's your next set. Go. All right, stuff like that. If you're doing a whole lot of conversing, you're not doing a whole lot of training. And if you are doing some conversing, if they have heavy work, they rest a little longer time, ask them stuff and then tell them fun stuff about what's going on with you. Just don't rant too long about yourself, because fundamentally nobody gives a shit, sure as hell, when they're not paying you money. But asking them stuff is nice. How was your day? How was this and that? And usually they'll go on the tangents they want. And remember, they're paying, they're in charge. The conversation is for them. And if they're having a good time, you're good to go. But fundamentally, a lot of it's about shutting them the fuck up and giving them a barbell. James?
Yeah, and I do think there is some merit to like, even if you just shooting the shit with them for a little bit, because I mean, it's kind of like a fraternity sorority type thing where they are kind of like paying for your companionship, your friendship to some degree. So it's good to have a rapport, good to like beat around the bush a little bit, but it should never be one of those things where they go off talking about their kids' like middle school play and you guys are just sitting around bullshitting about nonsense for 5-10 minutes at a time. It should just be like quick little snippets like, hey, how's your kids doing? Everything's good. Okay, go, like do your set, they're catching their breath. You give them a little bit of feedback. You say, okay, we're doing upright rows next. What do you want to warm up with? Okay, we're getting that set up while you're doing this other thing, like boom, boom, boom. It always should be in like a constant flow of things moving forward. You're moving on to the next exercise. You're giving them feedback on the things that they're doing, and you can pepper in some friendly stuff here or there. The problem that you run into is a lot of people just use bullshitting as an excuse not to do the workout. So I think it is important to have a good relationship and a good rapport. So you shouldn't avoid like, I don't want to say bullshit, but like, yeah, there's nothing wrong with shooting the shit with somebody as long as it's not a distraction.
Yeah. Question 6. How would you set up a client's nutrition in the aim of building muscle? With the client probably having no experience of tracking food, how would you go about trying to get them to eat the recommended protein amounts and calorie amounts? Do you just have a step-by-step plan that you coach the client through? Well, you can. You just put them on a physique template, for example, like a nutrition template from RP. The simplified diet templates are a really, really good place to start. But generally speaking, when I was a personal trainer, what I would do is this. You ask them what they eat, and you get a pretty good feel for what their average daily intake is like. And then you just modify it a little bit to get it a little bit more in the direction of going to muscle. Be like, so what I want you to do is I want you to, your breakfast currently is really great. What I want you to do is that I know you have lunch. You have breakfast at 6, and you have lunch at 12. Instead of a regular sandwich for lunch, I want you to do a double meat sandwich. Sound good? They're like, okay, great. And then at 3 p.m., instead of having like a Diet Coke, I want you to have a Diet Coke and have a protein bar and or a protein shake with that. Can you do that? Yes, great. Here's this muscle milk shake that I want you to drink. Do it. And then after you're done with me, go home at 7 p.m. I want you to make sure that you have a double helping of whatever your husband makes. Let's say your husband cooks and he's got, he's making salmon and some pasta. have a double helping of the salmon, and just make sure you eat enough pasta to make sure you're not hungry, instead of just having a little bit of salmon because it's not enough protein. Got it? Got it. Good. And then you work with them. You ask them how their diet's been going for days and days and weeks and weeks. And pretty soon, they're going to catch on and start doing what you're doing. And then they're going to be like, wow, like, okay, I'm actually gaining muscle. This is great. I'm making sure to, and they'll brag to you. Clients love to brag. So, oh, I have that protein. I told my husband, double salmon, and he gave it to me. Like, that's great. Right? My husband gave it to me. Like that.
Yeah. Give it to me, baby.
What
you say? I love
There's
it.
no. That was the peak party song. You can't get more party.
Oh my god! Oh my god! I'll put that on the smart speaker every now and again. I don't want to say its name because it turns on and then doesn't.
Yeah, it listens. It knows.
Yeah, but I blast that in the house. Oh, I love that
That's
song.
awesome. So basically, they'll let you know when they're being good, and you'll know when they're not being good, rather being compliant, because you'll be like, "So, double meat sandwich?" Like, "Yeah, just had a half a slice of pizza instead for lunch," and you're like, "Oh," and then they're going to want variety, right? At some point, they're going to be like, wow, "I'm tired of these double meat sandwiches. What else can I have?" You're like, "Aha! You could have chicken breast, you could have a protein shake, you could have a slab of fish, you could have this, you could have that." After a couple of months of that, they know two things: how to fundamentally eat well on a schedule and eat mostly healthy foods and eat high protein. And two, they know how to rotate protein sources and veggie sources and so on and so forth for variance. They fucking know everything now. And then at that point, you don't even need to tell them to do macros, or you can introduce them to macros if they really want to get super specific, but then they already have all the high quality habits of choosing healthy foods, knowing what so a terrible thing that James and I have been down the road with clients, and when we didn't know what we were doing, you introduce somebody where they buy a plan that they're just not suited for. They go, "Okay, so it says protein." You're like, "Yes." Like, she's like, "What's a protein source?" Like, Jesus fuck, like you don't even know what a protein source is. It's like an alien learning to play basketball. They're like, "What is a basketball?" You're like, "Okay, here's the ball, here's the court."
Or
right?
like trying to explain what professional wrestling is to an alien. They're just
100%. Are they in combat? You're like, "Not really."
Not really. But are they getting hurt? Like, yeah,
They're
but
really getting hurt. A lot more than regular wrestlers. So you want to build habits first, and fundamentally habits are built with easily replicable strategies. You do this, you do this, you do that. Keep it simple. Then as they get a little bored with the food choices, or they ask you about it, or even if you know that they're sticking to it super well, have them expand their food choices a little bit. And then later you can have them track a bit more specifically, where they're like, okay, now like on a cut, especially on a bulk, it's not a big deal, but on a cut, you're like, okay, I want the salmon the size of your fist, and that's it. Every night, salmon or chicken or steak, size of your fist. Got it? Like, got it. And at some point later, years later, you could be like, okay, remember they really know what they're eating and they know exactly how much. You're like, okay, we're going to replace fist-size stuff with ounces and grams. And then at that point, they know how to eat well. They've been doing it forever. They know all the foods to pick. Counting is not this new thing that comes in at the same time as everything else. Counting is just another one of the things, and it's so easy. And they're like, well, I've really eaten the same thing always. It's just a little bit titrated better with the exact RAM stuff. And then boom, and then they can do any macro diet you ever send them.
Absolutely, yeah. It's hard to have somebody who has no concept of dieting and throw them into macro counting. It's just
you got to build habits of eating healthy food. And
yes,
the big thing about knowing what healthy food is and what good food is and what it is. Right? Question 7: when you're bloated, doesn't mean you have trouble absorbing the food, so you're not going to be utilizing the carbs and protein as efficiently as normal. No, it almost certainly doesn't.
No.
You could be bloated for 50 trillion reasons, and the number one reason you're bloated is that you're not bloated. Your tummy is full. Like, people say I'm bloated, and they don't even know what that means. Like, this used to be a thing where everyone thought they were gluten intolerant because they would eat like 5 slices of pizza and be like, I'm so bloated. Motherfucker, you just ate 1,700 calories.
Yeah, not to mention like all the sodium and carbs that you just took in.
Yeah, it's insane. So,
You're
bloated.
got a body pump going, fool.
Yeah.
That's what that is.
When I have a lot of sushi, I'm real bloated. But like, I sure as hell wish I wasn't absorbing that food as efficiently as normal, because then I could eat sushi on a fucking cut. Also, you don't ever have to worry about the people outside of a medical context not absorbing food efficiently, because that's free calories. It just comes out of your ass the same way it went in. Not efficient absorption is great. It causes weight loss. This must be one of, not the biggest myths, but the most absurd myth on its face.
Mike hates this one. I've seen him rant on this so many times.
It's like,
it's getting more flustered as we go.
Yeah, Aiden isn't saying this, but other people will say like, oh man, I think the reason I'm gaining weight is because I'm not absorbing my food. You fucking, how can you possibly think that? It's backwards. You look at the fattest people in the world, them motherfuckers are really good at absorbing food. I mean, really good. Better than you.
Mike loves that 600-pound life.
Oh man, so I'm cutting again, and Crystal and I are going to be watching 600 Pound Life again. Last time I was massing. We tried to watch half an episode, and I tapped out. I was like, honey, I can't do this.
Do you guys do Dr. Pimple Popper also?
Crystal does that in her own spare time. I can't watch that shit.
It's amazing. What the fuck's wrong with your body? What is in there?
God, fuck that. Fuck all that. Question number 8. How would you set up a meal plan for someone? Is it basically setting meal timings, frequencies, calories, meal macro amounts, all aiming to fit around their schedule and training window, as well as then designing composition of the meals and getting all the nutrients clients needs? Or is there something only a nutritionist/dietitian could do? You could buy our Renaissance Diet Book 2.0, and it has an entire chapter about how to set up a meal plan for somebody. But remember, if they're beginners, you got to do it way more simply by establishing habits. That guide actually exists in our book called Understanding Healthy Eating. So if you have folks that really want a super meticulous diet, they've done macros and stuff before, Renaissance Diet 2.0 diet design is what you want. But outside of that, I think that for really regular people just starting out, you definitely want on the Understanding Healthy Eating approach, which basically just teaches you like, hey, first, you want to teach people what healthy foods are. And then you want to kind of get them eating the healthy foods. And then you want to work on getting them to split it up into distinct meals. And then you kind of want to get the meals to about the same, a regular size, right? And then you want to start measuring. And then by then you can tell them what to do very precisely.
Yeah, and also keep in mind, to that latter point, is this something only a nutritionist/dietitian can do? In some states, yes, there are legal consequences, so you cannot just freelance in some places. So just keep that in mind. It's I know you're asking from a place of like being good natured and probably wanting to help out your friends and family with diet plans, and maybe even thinking about it professionally someday. But all that being said, if you write somebody a diet plan, they have unrelated health complications, and it comes back that you were writing them a diet plan and you are doing that in a state where that is not allowed unless you're credentialed, you could get in some serious trouble. So keep that in mind.
Question 9, what are some most asked questions you received about training, nutrition, and health while you were a personal trainer on the gym floor? Spot reduction is a big one. Like, how do I get rid of my ass? Like, well, you got to suck it out with a vacuum. Another one is quick tricks and tips. How do I lose 20 pounds in a month? Like, well,
yes,
that's not a good idea. A lot of the times the people asking, how do I get rid of this? And then the women do their tricep fat. They just hold it. They're like, this, I want this. And it's so funny too, because that's an area of the body only women judge other women about. Like, I've never noticed tricep fat on anyone I thought was hot or not. I'm like, oh man, that lady's got tricep fat. No way. Like, bitch, what are you looking at that shit? Are you out of your fucking mind? It didn't even occur to me women looked at that until they were like all pointed out like this. I hate this. I'm like, oh, you're the onlyest person that hates that. I tell you that. But again, if women don't even get in shape for men, they get in shape to like just razz each other. I think it's almost like you could ask like a lifter that's bench 500 and wants to bench 550. Like, so are you trying to impress women? He'd be like, no, I'm trying to impress other lifters that are men. Like,
yes,
it's all
a dominance hierarchy type.
100%. It's all downhill. So a lot of times people ask stuff like that, spot reduction and super quick tips. And a lot of times they'll ask diet stuff, but a lot of it is, again, from that super, like, can I just eat this? And is this good? Or they'll ask single food questions, which are fucking ridiculous. Yes. Like, are avocados good? Like, no, actually, avocados are morally just bankrupt. But if you eat kiwis, the angels will side with you. What the fuck kind of question is that? But then they don't know. So you have to be like, hey, look, avocados and a bunch of other fruits and vegetables and healthy fat sources are really awesome for you. If, generally speaking, it's minimally processed. It's probably good for you in the context of a calorie balance. They're like, what's a calorie balance? You're like, aha.
Yeah, I was going to say, I used to get a lot of the like, is this good for you or bad for you? Like just one-offs, like, is this food good or bad? Is this food good or bad?
Yeah.
Is this exercise good or bad? Is squats bad for your knees? I heard that this like is bad for your back. Like just very vague, like kind of one-off.
Yeah.
Rinse and repeat type questions. Like, is this good? Is this good? Is this good?
Yeah.
Good. Like,
James, we should really do this at some point where we should create the ultimate RP diet guide where we actually just have to do this. You got to tell Mel about this because she'll go through and actually do this. We can get like 500 foods, like an April Fool's joke, 500 foods, and just a column check mark of good and bad, and just randomly fucking banana bad,
a third one,
pear bad,
killing you right now.
Yeah, I'd just be so sweet. Be like, RP said that avocados are bad. Be like, based on what? Like, it just says bad. And at the bottom will be like, April Fool's 2020, fucking idiot.
Have you seen that Family Guy clip where Peter's asking his personal trainer about like why certain foods are bad, and the guy can't come up with a good reason? He just scoffs at him. He's like, "You know, you can't eat pizza," and Peter's like, "Why?" And he's like, "Cause." It just goes. It goes on for like 5 minutes.
Amazing.
Oh my god! If you guys haven't seen it, it's a really funny Family Guy clip.
And the Stewie one where the guy hard sells Stewie, and he's like, by the way, just for the record, you came on real strong.
Yeah.
Just let you know.
Yeah. I forgot how funny Family Guy can be. I turned it on the other night. And
Yeah.
you know, like when you turn it on, that means you're guaranteed to be watching Family Guy for the next 3 hours, whether you choose
100%.
to or not.
Yeah.
You just get locked into it.
Yeah. It's funny, and then sometimes they have these like off the wall, deep insider Hollywood jokes, like, "Oh, and Margot Kidder." I'm like, "Who the fuck is that?"
Yeah.
Like some woman that played in Superman in 1982. Like, fuck. There's got to be some kind of like Hollywood nerd somewhere. I think that's the funniest joke of all time.
Oh yeah. Sometimes they'll even do that and then go and explain it for the audience too. Like as like they do like the
Yeah.
meta thing, they break that fourth wall. I think it's funny.
Yeah. One of the funniest things, and it's just randomly things that are insider funny, is the Hitler video meme for various things like CrossFit, powerlifting. Remember the Hitler video where people would read?
Oh yes. Where
So
he's
good.
in the conference room thing. Yeah, yeah.
Just so good. I remember one guy did, I think it's Andrew Grabnetsky. He did the equipped powerlifting Hitler. It was so good. He's like, yeah, he's like, well, people are going to join my fed. What about Steiner? And they're like, so Steiner has his own federation. And he's actually weaving a fourth ply into his shirt. He's like, shit. Everyone who has their own federation. This is so sweet because they're all offices. Everyone who has their own fed, get out. And like half the office leaves.
I love those. Those never got old. Now Hitler's like even more taboo than usual Hitler taboo.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like
Fun guy.
it's like making fun of Hitler is now like a microaggression against the Germans.
Yes, isn't that fucked up?
It's come full circle. It's like no,
Yeah, the Jews are like, and the Germans are like, oh, but we somehow feel bad.
I don't even think the Germans are. I think they're like, no, it's fine. Like, go ahead. And
Yeah.
all the like college age white folks are like,
regular
"No."
college age American white folks will feel bad for you even if you don't. Question number 10. What do you think of bodybuilders not locking out on movements to keep tension on the muscle? He said, sort of encountered this the other day at my gym. I was doing dumbbell incline presses the way Jared does them, by allowing the dumbbell to come all the way down and touch the side of my chest. And the guy said that it wasn't keeping tension on the muscle. I wasn't able to get
What
a word
guy?
to explain why. Some guy.
Some guy.
You're like, hey, guy, get the fuck out of my face.
Well, he says the guy as if like we're supposed to know who the guy
Yeah.
is.
The one cool thing about getting more jacked is that when you get to like be about 20 pounds lighter than James at his height, people stop coming up to you at all. They don't tell you shit. I haven't had anyone tell me a fucking thing in the gym in 10 years. Like, especially with the way my head looks. They're like, nah, that guy looks like.
I was gonna say we also have like kind of the bitch face going too. At least
Yeah,
I-
for sure. But it's like, I don't know what guys are like, oh, you shouldn't do that. Hey, guy, I'll pay you for your advice when I feel it worthy.
Yeah.
But anyway, I wasn't able to get a word to explain why I was doing it, but it made me think of what I would say to him and people like that who cut the wrong short to keep tension on the muscle. Thanks for answering. You know what you could tell him is you say, you know, when I lock out, it gives me a little bit of rest. And then when I go back, I can do a few extra reps like that. And they'd be like, okay. And they'd be like, that gives me more total tension. And he'd be like, but if you don't rest and you just keep getting tension on the muscle, it's the same tension either way. You'd be like, cool. So it's the same. And he'd be like, okay. Like, so your method isn't any better. And then they'll predictably, I've got this all mapped out. They'll say, well, it's bad to lock out your joints. You'd be like, oh, is that true? Like, yes. And be like, why? And they'll just make stuff up.
Yes.
So-
Yeah. I think like the idea of not locking out for the purposes of keeping tension on the muscle is kind of silly. But I think where there is some credence there is I think the majority of times people use partial range of motion in I'm talking about like bodybuilders specifically,
Yeah.
is to increase their mind muscle connection with the movement. I think
Yeah.
that is a good merit. That's something that you should be seeking to do. But I still think that doing the full range of motion is just a better, you can get a good mind muscle connection and use full range of motion. And that's probably the best outcome. So like, what I'm trying to give them a little credit here, saying like what they're trying to actually do is not so much keep tension on the muscle. That's what they think they're trying to do. They're just trying to get a good feel, a good mind muscle connection on that movement. So they want to feel the chest working. They don't want to feel, the tension come off. Is it really about the tension coming on enough? No, that's the point. But it's a good idea, just a misapplication.
Totally. All right. YouTube time.
Oh, God. Actually, we haven't, well, I know we cherry pick, but we haven't had, I kind of scroll through a lot of the YouTube ones, and we never really have any trolling or anything like that.
Yeah, we will when we get more popular. All right. Sean is something. Says, hey guys, this is more of a kinesiology question. Bodybuilders use exercise like spider curls and tricep kickbacks to train those muscles in their shortest or most contracted positions, and then exercise like incline curls and overhead extensions to train them in the most lengthened positions. Is there a benefit to this given that A, the muscles are weakest in those positions due to the length-tension relationship, and B, they are biarticular muscles and are passively actively insufficient when trying to act on two joints at the same time when places in their extreme positions? I'd love for you to shed some light on this whole thing because I find the whole active passive insufficiency thing confusing. Don't worry, everyone does. When it comes to hypertrophy, does it matter if the muscles are less able to produce force in those positions as long as we're putting tension on those desired muscles? So it does matter, but here's the thing. First of all, training muscles in their lengthened position actually shows as an independent stimulator of hypertrophy, so it's already a good thing. So I wouldn't worry about if it a little bit compromised on tension because just the lengthened position has a different kind of additive hypertrophy effect. Training them in a shortened position has a little bit of a downside, but that downside can often be super or compensated with an enhancement in the mind-muscle connection. Your ability to target exactly the muscle you want can be better if the muscle's in a shortened position. For example, your chest, if you really flex your chest and get your arm all the way across, it's much easier to feel your chest than if you were training in the mid-range of motion or something like that, oftentimes. Same with your bicep, big deal. Spider curls, when you curl at the top, you can really feel the fuck out of your biceps. Now, if the position is so weird that the tension produced is so low that you have trouble generating a mind-muscle connection because you're like, I feel like I'm just moving instead of really tensing the muscle a lot, or really just there's not even any metabolites being produced because the muscle just feels like it's moving around and not really putting a ton of tension, then it's too much. And I would use those exercises sparingly or not at all. So you're looking for exercises that attack the muscle from a variety of positions. That's good. And they have to have a minimum amount of tension throughput that results in the feeling of, oh, wow, like I'm really using my biceps, or on the heavier weights and on the lighter weights, be like, I'm using my biceps because, holy fuck, my biceps are on fire. But if those things are happening, it's more than enough tension to cause hypertrophy. Hypertrophy is tension mediated, but is more volume mediated and more going to failure or close mediated than it is tension mediated. So as long as the amount of tension isn't super, super low, you're good to go. So for example, if you lock your arms out and then you do pec flies all the way down, at the very bottom, you can feel like your chest is basically doing nothing because at that point your biceps have taken over completely and your shoulder joint's just in fucking agony. So your force production is so low, the dumbbells you would have to use would be like the 10s or the 20s, which means it's a dog shit movement for 95% of the ROM. And at the bottom 5%, it's the only thing you can lift, but that's not even a good thing because you can barely activate your chest. That sucks. So cutting the ROM a little bit absolutely makes sense in that context. So as long as an exercise isn't so insufficient that you can barely use any weight and you can't feel the muscle really contracting and being challenged, then it's a bit too much. But generally speaking, a bunch of the examples you gave, they're still really, really good. I would just say don't get too exotic when training muscles at their most long and most short. Most exercises, you should feel the most tension in the middle of the range of motion, and the extremes are totally fine to go through as well. James?
Yeah, and I agree with Mike on that. And I just want to point out, like, within the question, Sean, you say bodybuilders use exercises like blah, blah, blah for these reasons. They don't do it for those reasons at all. They just do those exercises because that's what they think they need to do. So I think you're trying to apply logic to an illogical, outcome, basically. So just my point being is like most bodybuilders are stupid and not trained in exercise science. So they just do tricep kickbacks because kickbacks train the triceps, brah. That's it. That's the only reason they would give you. It has nothing to do with length tension relationships, active insufficiency, anything like that.
Yeah. Luis, this is not a question. Luis Carvalho, who I know from Facebook, says, "Porra, caralho."
He appreciated that last
you
time.
Guys even more. Yeah, I'm pretty sure he's from Portugal. All right. Riley, our second question says, when training forearms, better to focus on knuckle side of forearm top or palm side bottom? Not sure if training both is what's needed or if I should train only one side. Seems like you, Charlie, only do pull up or wrist curls. Not sure if reverse wrist curls have any merit. They do have a little bit. The thing is your extensors never really get that big, but your flexors are real big muscles. Yes. It's like asking about calves. Do you train your tibialis anterior or your gastrocs and soleus? We're like, fuck. People can't even tell if you have a big tibialis anterior. But if you have big gastrocs and soleus, holy fuck, like it's big, right? So I would say mostly curls, but some extensions are probably okay. Then again, like if you do a lot of upright rows, if you do a lot of lateral raises, your extensors probably get more than enough volume to get them like 70% of as big as they'd be. And a 30% difference in your extensor size is really just like nobody will ever notice. So for bodybuilding, it's kind of like bodybuilding. Sorry, real quick.
Yeah.
For bodybuilding, it's kind of like, you say, okay, hypertrophy, yes. Of all skeletal muscles, yes. Okay, so diaphragm hypertrophy, like nobody sees it. So they're like what is it, levator scapulae hypertrophy, where those are completely internal muscles, like you'll never see it. Like bodybuilding is not about growing everything; it's about growing the muscles that make you look cool. So some muscles have to sort of like take a backseat.
And sometimes, like, when you can see some people who have like really fucking popping external extensors on their forearms, and that looks cool, but that's more just a product of how they look, not necessarily like that they trained it and it just blew up and that's how it looked. Like their forearms probably looked like that anyway, and now it's just bigger and looks really neat. I've seen some guys where you look at their forearm extensors, how it comes up into their tricep, and you're like, oh my god, your arm looks fucking freaky.
For sure.
But they were just going to look that way anyway. You know what I mean? So it's not worth putting a lot of training effort into.
Yeah. I've actually had a legitimate critique of a few of my programs. Like, oh, I don't see an anterior tib guide. I'm like, you're a fucking idiot.
Get out of here.
And you won't. That's one of my answers. All right. Nicola.
No, Bob.
Our last YouTube question for the day says Athlean X. Now that's absolutely all capitalized. Which it should be. Jason Blaha and Arnold Schwarzenegger are proponents of the bicep cheat curl with a super slow negative. I'm going to pause the question to go to Huffman Tree's response. It says, LOL, the way you listed them made it sound like they were peers in some sense. Arnold would be killing himself.
Huffman Tree, very much appreciated. That was a good
comment. Cheat bicep curl is super slow negative. Do you recommend this variation of hypertrophy? Is the bicep getting extra stimulation? Yes, making it the best bicep exercise, not the best, but a very stimulative one. We'll get to that second part in a sec. I would have thought if it did, you would have written about it on the Bicep Training Tips on RP article. Yeah, so here's the thing. The cheat curl with slow eccentric, with controlled eccentric bicep curl is unbelievably stimulating, but is super fucking fatiguing. So in stimulus to fatigue ratio, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It's like if someone asks you, like, hey, do you ever like take a deadlift off of a rack, have people move the rack, slow eccentric the deadlift down, and then somebody picks it up, and then you do it again? Would that be stimulative? Fuck, my God, it'd be so stimulative. But the problem is the fatigue would be unbelievable because of the amount of load you're using and the acute injury risk, which is actually pretty decent with bicep cheat curls. Like a lot of guys actually pull their biceps. Bicep cheat curling, what's his name? The Australian dude did it.
Yeah. With the two man curl, 405. Yeah.
The 405. It's funny because the other guy was Chris Bumstead, and Chris Bumstead is Mr. Olympia now. Like, he could have fucking washed his own career down the drain because in the physique Olympia, if your bicep doesn't look right, you're fucking done. Like, I was just like, Chris Bumstead, like, he's a super sharp guy, and we all did dumb shit. But I was watching, I was like, Chris, why the fuck would you do this, man? Don't fucking do stupid shit like this. Callum Von Moger, and Callum was the one that tore his bicep doing the cheat curl, right? And you can certainly do that by yourself, you know.
And then later tore it again, like doing like a repelling thing.
Shit, yeah. He's such a nice guy too. Like everything on his, you seem like it's a nice, genuine person. I just want him to stop doing dumb shit. But anyway, the fatigue is too high, and the injury risk is just a bit higher than you'd want it. And also, here's the thing, right? When you're saying we can do an eccentric and do a negative, what you're really saying is we want the total force to be higher than basically 85% 1 rep. But there's no additive hypertrophy benefit to higher than 85% 1 rep. So as long as you're in the 5 to 10 rep range on a full range of motion, going any heavier has no additive benefits, and it has big added downsides. So it's almost like someone says, like, man, if I do, like, this is a common reply to people who do like partial ranges, like incline barbell press, but like only the mid range. Like, I can use more weight like this. Like, yes. But if you do full range of motion and do sets of 5, you're using as much weight as you'll ever benefit from, but it's much safer, and it's much more straightforward, and it's much easier to track, and so on and so on and so on. And they're like, well, I guess, right? So no, we wouldn't recommend that exercise because while it is stimulative, it is very fatiguing. And there's a bunch of other things that I've said before on many of my posts. If you go on Facebook, I have a public account. You can search cheating technique, so on and so forth, with my name, and I have a bunch of old posts that are really to the point, because there's a bunch of problems with these. Another one that comes to mind on cheat curls is, how do you track something like that? How much did you cheat? How slow was the negative? Things like that are
Even
like
just controlling how much how much assist you're doing, right?
right.
It's
right.
like,
How
okay,
much
as
did
it
you
gets
cheat
harder,
versus-
you're going to have to assist more and more and more. Now you have a vast discrepancy in the technique within the same session, within the same
100%.
actual like set. And like, how do you even assess RIR or something?
Oh yeah. Oh
right?
sure.
You're adding more cheat as you go. Like,
Yeah.
why do you stop? So that's an easy way to do what we would call a supra maximal effort, meaning you've just gone above what you were really physically capable of doing just by using a cheat, right? And so that's a really easy way of exceeding your MRV. Like, boom, instantly overreached on that muscle.
Yep. Boom. Lots of other questions, folks, here, but unfortunately we can't get to them all. That is just what is the deal nowadays. Stop share. No, James. Stop reading my shit.
I saw it. It was enhanced versus natural training. And I think it had Ric Flair.
No, that's John Meadows, actually.
Oh, was it John Meadows? I only caught a glimpse of it. I was
Yeah.
like, why is Ric Flair in there?
John Meadows does look a little like Ric Flair from
A
various
little bit.
angles.
Yeah. Okay. I can see that. Folks, we're going to wrap this one up. So we had 2 this week. Thanks for being patient with us. We had a little travel going on, so we broke it up. We're going to try and stay on track for next week as normal. So thanks for tuning in. If you guys are enjoying our nonsense, please hit the subscribe button. There's also a ton of other cool stuff like the RP podcast, and there's some RP Plus videos that get kind of filtered into this stream. So if you really enjoy kind of our sport and exercise, science, and nutrition related stuff, subscribe, and there will be plenty more on the way. Mike, you got anything?
Good for now.
All right, folks. Talk to you next time.
Peace.